My name is Ted. People called me a monster, a psychopath, a sociopath. I never described myself that way. I simply acted as I understood myself to be. My childhood looked normal from the outside, but inside the house there was confusion. I didn't know who I really was, who I belonged to. My real mother, my real father, unclear. That weakens the idea of identity. When you don't feel your own identity, you don't really care about others. Society liked me. Successful, polite, helpful. I showed people the person they wanted to see. I didn't need a mask. That behavior was my mask. Lying wasn't a defense. It was a method. I had relationships. I had a girlfriend. I had plans. I was in law school. I was stepping into politics. A normal life on the surface, but there was another side, the need for control. You can call it a desire for power. It's not something you put into words. It just exists. The first crime is not a dramatic turning point. Something triggers it, then it happens again. And after a while, it becomes normal. This is not an excuse. It's simply the process. The victims were not random. Weakness drew my attention. Fear, vulnerability, isolation. Many people cannot protect themselves. I used that. I was caught. I escaped. I was caught again. I defended myself in court. No one knew me better than I knew myself. Yes, that was pride. At that time, I believed I could control the situation. The death sentence was inevitable. My final years were full of questioning. I confessed, withdrew, spoke again. I wanted control, even in the eyes of the public, until the end. Some said justice was served. Some are still trying to understand. For me, the end was obvious. The electric chair was a conclusion, not a surprise. People still talk about me. Why? Because they are curious about darkness. Not about me, about the idea itself. I was simply an example. That's it.
Between 1974 and 1978, at least 30 women across the United States disappeared, were assaulted, or murdered. The cases span multiple states, including Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and Florida. Investigation files from this period document a consistent offender profile. A white male, intelligent, socially competent, and capable of gaining trust quickly. Police departments worked independently with limited interstate data sharing. Nationwide criminal databases did not yet exist. Forensic technology was limited. DNA profiling was not developed. Eyewitness description accuracy was inconsistent and often unreliable. During these years, universities and college campuses became primary locations of victim disappearance reports. Public safety protocols were minimal. Most campuses did not employ modern security systems, surveillance cameras, or structured emergency communication programs. By late 1974, law enforcement offices began noting similarities between cases in Washington state. Descriptions referenced a young man with a cast or arm sling, driving a light-colored Volkswagen Beetle. Witness statements referred to the name Ted. Despite growing suspicion, the suspect remained unidentified. He continued to move freely, change states, change academic institutions, and maintain employment and social relationships without raising formal alarm. In January 1978, after multiple escapes from custody, the same offender committed a violent attack inside the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. 2 students were killed, 2 others were injured. This event resulted in accelerated coordinated law enforcement efforts leading to his final arrest. His name was Theodore Robert Bundy, born November 24, 1946, Burlington, Vermont. Executed January 24, 1989, Florida State Prison. Over the course of more than a decade, Bundy manipulated legal systems, media perception, romantic relationships, and public trust. His case remains one of the most extensively studied examples of psychopathic criminal behavior in American history. This documentary examines early developmental conditions, psychological deviations, criminal evolution, victimology patterns, investigative failures, courtroom behavior, media impact, and long-term criminological lessons. He was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. A date recorded quietly in hospital archives, no headlines, no warnings. Just another child entering post-war America, a nation rebuilding its confidence and imagining a bright future. His name was not a symbol then. It carried no fear, no myth, no darkness. It was simply Theodore Robert Cowell, a name that later changed just as the personality behind it would. Bundy did not arrive into chaos or poverty. He entered a world that appeared stable, respectable, almost ordinary. The United States in the late 1940s believed in family values, in community trust, in the idea that a safe neighborhood created safe people. It was a time when danger was imagined to come from outside, not from within the living room or the family tree. For his first years, Ted lived in Philadelphia with the people he believed were his parents. In reality, they were his grandparents. The woman he believed was his sister was his biological mother. This was not a dramatic movie twist. It was a quiet administrative lie, a decision made to protect social reputation, but identity is fragile. And when the truth of one's origin is constructed on secrecy rather than honesty, a crack forms early. This secrecy was not explained to him, it simply existed like a closed door in a familiar house. A child learns from silence as much as from words. He learned that truth could be rewritten. He learned that appearances mattered more than realities. He learned that identity could be adjusted for convenience. These lessons did not create his future crimes, but they formed the soil in which his later traits would grow. Inside the household, discipline was strict. Temper bubbled behind controlled expressions. Stories from surviving relatives describe emotional distance, quiet tensions, rigid expectations. Bundy grew up watching emotional restraint, not emotional warmth. In homes like this, children often learn to perform feelings rather than feel them. Outside, America celebrated optimism. Children played in safe yards, church bells rang on Sundays. Television families smiled as if nothing dark existed beneath the surface of life. In such a society, there was little room to discuss confusion, identity doubts, or inner silence. Those who did not fit the mold learned to hide it. And Bundy hid everything. As he grew, he discovered that he was different. Not in a dramatic way at first, not in ways others could see, but in the quiet internal moments where empathy is supposed to take shape, where conscience should grow. For many children, discomfort leads to curiosity or fear. For Bundy, it produced mimicry. He observed, he copied. He practiced socially acceptable expressions like an actor memorizing lines. By school age, teachers described him as polite, quiet, well-mannered. There were no dramatic behavioral alarms. No violence, no public signs of cruelty. He blended in. He became exactly what he needed to survive in a world that valued appearance over confession. This period shaped one of his most dangerous skills, adaptation. He learned to become what people expected him to be. He learned to listen without revealing. He learned that invisibility, when chosen, was powerful. He also learned he preferred control, not physical yet, but psychological. Control over how others saw him, control over the narrative of his own existence. Years later, investigators, psychologists, and criminologists would search for early scenes of brutality or obvious red flags. But Bundy's beginnings remind us of a harsher truth. Not every predator announces himself in childhood. Sometimes the most dangerous individuals grow in plain sight, not because they are born with fangs, but because they learn how to hide the hunger behind a clean and carefully managed smile. This was not yet the killer, but it was the child who would build the mask. And masks, once perfected, can be deadly. To understand Ted Bundy, one must first understand the house he grew up in, not through dramatic events, but through the quiet pressures and invisible expectations that shaped him. His childhood home was not marked by chaos in the traditional sense. It was marked by appearances, by silence, and by a strict internal order that tolerated routine but not vulnerability. Ted's biological mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, became pregnant at a time when single motherhood carried intense social stigma. In the 1940s, such a situation was not merely uncomfortable. It threatened reputation, family honor, and social acceptance. Society punished women for mistakes more harshly than it judged men for deception. So, a decision was made. The child would be raised as the son of his grandparents. His mother would be introduced to him as his older sister. This was not malicious in intention, it was protective. But protection built from secrecy can turn into psychological distortion. Children learn identity through clarity. Bundy learned it through false roles and concealed truths. Instead of a linear self-concept, he had layered delusions. Instead of open emotional conversation, there was performance and routine. Instead of authenticity, there was correction, structure, and quiet expectation. A family that needed to preserve its image unintentionally taught its child one lesson above all. Image is survival. Inside the home, authority was firm. Accounts from relatives suggest a household ruled more by discipline than warmth, more by tradition than emotional expression. The patriarchal figure was strict, sometimes harsh, and deeply concerned with moral appearance. Religion, duty, and order were emphasized. Weakness, doubt, or emotional vulnerability found no space to grow. In such environments, emotional detachment thrives. Children who cannot safely express fear or sadness often turn inward. Some build resilience, others build masks. Bundy built masks. His early years were not marked by dramatic abuse in the visible sense. There were no police reports, no social alarms, no documented violence that demands obvious sympathy. Instead, there was a subtler form of emotional shaping, the absence of warmth, the suppression of questions, the avoidance of truth. Homes that cannot acknowledge reality create children who cannot trust it. When Ted eventually moved with his mother to Washington, the official narrative shifted. He learned his sister was in fact his mother. He discovered his identity was altered by adults for social survival. A normal reaction might be confusion followed by adjustment. Bundy's reaction, later noted by psychologists, was withdrawal and quiet calculation. He understood early that identity could be manufactured, that truth could be rearranged, that a person could present one face to the world while hiding another. He did not rebel against this lesson, he adopted it. He learned not only to lie, but to lie convincingly, cleanly, without internal conflict. Not to avoid punishment, but to shape perception. In many people, hidden truths build empathy for others facing confusion. In Bundy, secrecy built strategy. He became attuned to social expectations, not as guidelines to belong, but as tools to manipulate. By adolescence, he did not simply want to fit in, he wanted to control how he was seen. Control became his first psychological hunger. Family structure also shaped a second trait, resentment masked by politeness. Ted watched norms enforced rigidly, watched opinions held firmly, watched emotions suppressed. He learned how to obey externally while disagreeing internally. He learned that internal desires could exist without expression. He learned to perform compliance, not feel it. Years later, this same split would appear in his criminal behavior. Gentle voice, friendly approach, academic vocabulary. And behind it, force, domination, irreversible harm. A polite mask with violent intent beneath. This is not to say the family created a killer. Many endure secrecy without becoming predators. But Bundy's home created conditions that suited his innate traits. A place where emotional distance did not seem abnormal. A culture where image outranked truth. A structure where secrets lived quietly rather than being confronted. Had he been born into chaos, disorder, or explicit cruelty, his pathology might have been visible early. Instead, he learned to disappear psychologically, to operate as part of a system without revealing his inner world. He learned to mimic stability instead of discovering humanity. A child in an honest world learns honesty. A child in a hidden world learns masks. Bundy would carry this lesson into adulthood, into friendships, relationships, classrooms, and eventually crime scenes. People would later call him unpredictable. But his foundation was not unpredictability. It was camouflage. Built not in darkness, but in the polite silence of an American household that valued appearance more than truth. This chapter ends not with violence, but with formation. The world sees a quiet boy, moving, growing, adapting. Inside, a personality is collecting tools. Silence, secrecy, performance, control. The crimes have not begun, but the mask is nearly ready. Identity forms slowly. It grows through names, roles, attachments, the truths a child absorbs. Ted Bundy's identity did not form, it fractured. He learned he was not who he thought he was, and the world around him was not what it pretended to be. When he discovered that his sister was actually his mother, the realization did not produce tears or confrontation. There was no scene, no dramatic rejection. Bundy's reaction was internal, silent, and analytical. He did not ask why. He did not demand clarity. He absorbed the information and stored it like a file. A shift happened quietly. Trust became optional. Truth became negotiable. Identity became something flexible rather than natural. Most people learn who they are through stable mirrors. Family, community, relationships. Bundy learned through broken reflections. Each truth he received came with delayed honesty, late corrections, social distortions. He saw that identity was a game adults played. So he learned to play it better. As he moved with his mother to Washington, the new chapter in his life did not bring emotional resolution. He did not openly resent her. He did not seek warmth. Instead, he observed her struggle, her effort to rebuild, her attempts to give him normalcy. He understood she was trying. He also understood she lied. Both truths existed, and neither bred empathy. They bred calculation. In school, Bundy appeared ordinary, sometimes even likable. He participated when needed, avoided trouble, blended into academic rhythms. But socially, he sensed his own difference. He did not connect easily with other children. Friendship was not natural to him. He watched others bond, laugh, form relationships, and something inside him remained untouched. He was present, but not part of them. Isolation did not depress him, it sharpened him. Children learn emotions by sharing them. Bundy practiced them like tasks. He imitated kindness. He mirrored politeness. He understood what sadness looked like, what joy sounded like, what sympathy required. But these were learned behaviors, not lived ones. He did not feel with others, he studied others. He did not join humanity, he rehearsed it. A growing fascination with hidden identities began to appear. He read stories about outlaws, secret agents, figures who lived double lives. He admired control and invisibility. The idea that a person could be one thing in public and another in private appealed to him. He was living that reality already. His life was a quiet training ground for deception. Social rejection affected him, but not like it affects most people. Most seek connection to soothe rejection. Bundy sought superiority. He felt unnoticed, so he developed fantasies of being exceptional. He felt socially small, so he dreamed of personal power. Not power built through achievement, power built through hidden dominance. As adolescence approached, another layer emerged. He became acutely aware of attractiveness, not just his own potential, but others' responses to beauty and confidence. He saw that charm worked. He watched popular boys command attention. He watched girls respond to confidence and physical appeal. Bundy studied charm the way one studies a tool, not as a natural trait, but as a strategy to be learned and used. He began to shape himself. Adjust posture, practice smiles, refine gestures. Charm did not come from personality. It came from observation and adaptation. Bundy did not grow charm, he engineered it. He also became aware of class differences. He envied wealth and status. Children with better clothes, better manners, polished families, he cataloged them. He did not resent their position, he envied their social power. He wanted that smooth confidence, that unquestioned acceptance, not to belong to them, but to surpass them. By late adolescence, the internal fracture was complete. There was Ted as the world saw him. Polite, calm, bright, harmless, and there was the internal Ted. Calculating identity like a formula, storing slights like ammunition. Imagining futures based not on belonging, but on domination. He did not yet know the shape of his future crimes. He did not yet feel the physical hunger that would define him later, but he knew one thing clearly. If the world would not recognize him voluntarily, he would force it to. Identity did not anchor him, it armed him. He was not searching for who he was preparing to become whoever he needed to be, in order to take what he felt he deserved. The mask had a face now, soon it would have purpose. Adaptation was not simply a habit for Ted Bundy, it was a survival mechanism. During adolescence, most teenagers search for who they are. Bundy studied who he needed to seem like. He approached identity not as a discovery, but as an assignment. Roles could be learned, perfected, and deployed as needed. In high school, he was neither invisible nor prominent. He occupied a neutral place, a space that allowed him to observe without being observed. His classmates did not suspect internal turbulence, a developing emotional vacuum, or a sense of separateness. He walked the halls like everyone else, carried books like everyone else, spoke politely like everyone else. Yet, unlike others, his behavior was calculated. Social interaction for him was rehearsal, not expression. He developed a habit, watching faces. He watched how people smiled when they were comfortable, how their voices shifted when they lied, how embarrassment moved across a forehead before someone looked away. These details mattered to him. Human behavior was a code, and he was learning to read it fluently. He became sensitive to approval and disapproval, but not because he felt joy or shame. He valued advantages. He wanted to know which expressions bought trust and which behaviors earned acceptance. Bundy began experimenting, small shifts in tone, different ways of speaking, selective honesty. Mimicking gestures he saw in confident boys, in admired adults, in television personalities who embodied charisma. Charisma, to him, was not charm, it was leverage. Every social response became data, every compliment confirmed a tactic. Every ignored comment marked a failed technique. While others played sports for competition or friendship, Bundy studied the dynamics around them. He noted who listened when certain boys spoke. He noted which girls gravitated toward confidence and humor. He calculated the currency of social belonging. Strength, humor, politeness, ambition. He concluded that the world rewarded a performance of security, not the presence of sincerity. He also discovered the power of humility, at least as others interpreted it. He learned that appearing modest could soften perception, could make others open their guard. By appearing harmless, he could step closer. By acting slightly unsure, he could provoke encouragement and sympathy. Weakness, when simulated, was not a vulnerability for him, it was a tactic. The beginning of the injured arm persona that would later allow him to approach victims with a cast and a soft request for help. Inside, however, there was no humility. Ambition lived beneath the surface, ambition not for achievement, but for validation and control. Bundy wanted admiration not as appreciation, but as proof of influence. Approval was not emotional nourishment, it was confirmation that his performance worked. Teachers noted intelligence, classmates remembered politeness. Family described him as quiet, respectful, reserved. All observations were true, but none reflected inner reality. He began to understand that the world trusted appearances. People believed politeness signaled goodness. They believed a clean face and direct eye contact suggested honesty. They believed intelligence and ambition predicted integrity. Bundy learned to embody all of these on command. This was the period during which he internalized one of his most dangerous beliefs: that morality is not earned through character but simulated through behavior. If he could mirror what good men looked like, sounded like, and moved like, then he was effectively one of them. Performance replaced conscience. This development did not arise from theatrical interest. Bundy did not seek applause, he sought invisibility and access. He understood that the most effective mask is the one the world wants to see. A young man with promise, potential, and politeness rarely invites suspicion. And suspicion was the enemy. He also noticed something else. Sympathy, especially from women, could be evoked when he projected vulnerability. Not real vulnerability, staged, minimal, controlled. A slight insecurity here, a quiet comment there, enough to generate reassurance and interest. Bundy learned not only how to imitate confidence, but how to imitate weakness strategically. He practiced emotional shapes without emotional content. During these years, he did not seek deep connection, he sought proximity and observation. Relationships were not emotional experiences, they were mirrors. Each interaction showed him what worked and what needed refinement. He learned when to speak and when to remain silent. He learned to adjust his tone depending on who stood in front of him. He learned that charm was not natural charisma. Charm was the result of studying what people wanted to hear and then offering it back to them. Bundy did not simply wear a mask, he built multiple masks. A polite student mask, a quiet son mask, a respectful young man mask. He refined them not to hide weakness but to hide absence. There was no core identity he was protecting. There was an internal emptiness shaping itself into whatever form granted him acceptance or advantage. This chapter in his life reveals a troubling truth. Bundy did not lose himself. He never formed a self in the conventional emotional sense. He did not suppress feelings, he lacked them. He did not conceal empathy, he never developed it. His mask was not a shield but a substitute for a missing internal world. By the time he entered late adolescence, the transformation was complete enough for him to pass unnoticed in society, a polite, articulate young man. A future student, a potential professional. Someone who looked like he belonged anywhere he walked. Someone who, in reality, belonged nowhere. Soon, he would enter university environments where identity could be reinvented again, this time not only socially but intellectually. He would refine his mask further, shaping it into a tool that could open doors, earn trust, and eventually lure victims. The world saw promise, the world saw civility. The world saw a young man preparing to become someone successful. Bundy saw only opportunity to shape perception. Opportunity to control outcomes, opportunity to blend so completely into ordinary life that no one would ever suspect what lived underneath. The mask was no longer a practice, it was becoming his primary existence. And once a mask becomes more convincing than the face beneath it, the face disappears. Charm is often described as a gift, a natural radiance, an effortless ability to make others feel seen, valued, comfortable. For Ted Bundy, charm was not a gift, it was a construction. A deliberate, calculated process refined through practice, observation, and necessity. When he entered young adulthood, Bundy did not yet possess the effortless charisma he would later become known for. What he had was hunger for approval, presence, and recognition. Charm was never about connection for him. It was about access to trust, access to admiration, access to vulnerability. At the University of Washington, Bundy saw a new world: ambitious students, confident personalities, social competition. He realized that the rules of belonging had changed. It was not enough to imitate politeness anymore. Now, he had to stand out without appearing to try. He had to be interesting, not just harmless. He learned quickly that confidence attracted attention. So he studied confident people and began copying them. He listened to their tone, noted their body language, and observed how they used eye contact and smiles to disarm others. Bundy adopted each piece like an actor preparing for a lead role, not because he admired them, but because he understood that confidence created power. Bundy also discovered the selective use of vulnerability. A brief hesitation, a modest self-comment, a quiet laugh at his own flaws, such moments made him seem relatable. People responded with warmth, support, even admiration. To them, he appeared humble, kind, approachable. To Bundy, humility was a fishing line. Every sympathetic response confirmed the tactic worked. He crafted his speech patterns, learned when to pause for dramatic effect, when to lower his voice, when to smile. He made eye contact longer than normal, but not uncomfortably long, just enough to seem sincere. Women described him as gentlemanly, composed, attentive. Men found him likable, polite, sometimes even admirable. He began dressing more carefully, speaking with more certainty, stepping into spaces with quiet confidence. Each improvement refined the persona he was constructing. Bundy learned that looking professional made people assume professionalism. Looking intelligent made people assume intelligence. Looking sincere made people assume sincerity. This was not organic growth, it was engineering. The product of pure observation and internal emptiness molded into a convincing social exterior. He also started experimenting with academic environments beyond his capability. Law school textbooks appeared in his hands. Political volunteer positions surfaced on his resume. He inserted himself into circles of influence, not fully belonging, but never questioned. He developed a rhythm: get in, blend in, learn the language, and act like you belong. Where genuine experience failed, presentation filled the gap. Bundy's relationships during this time exposed another layer of his evolving charm: targeted affection. He learned to offer interest, attention, and flattery not out of desire, but out of strategic benefit. He could be affectionate without attachment. He could be romantic without feeling. Connection was transactional. Every emotional display performed for effect. His first serious romantic relationship served as both a training ground and a revelation. He realized that emotional closeness gave him information, access, and control. He learned to say what a partner wanted to hear, to project security while remaining detached. At times he seemed caring, devoted, attentive. At other times, cold, distant, and unavailable. The inconsistency was not accidental. It was observation. He noticed how longing increased attachment. He saw how unpredictability deepened emotional grip. He would later apply this dynamic to manipulate victims long before physical harm ever occurred. Bundy's social success solidified a new self-belief. He could shape perception at will. Smiling at the right moment turned suspicion into trust. A serious expression created authority. A gentle tone invited sympathy. People responded not to who he was, but to who he appeared to be. This realization deepened his internal divide. There was the external Bundy, charming, intelligent, courteous, ambitious. And the internal Bundy, hollow, calculating, emotionally stagnant, quietly contemptuous of those he fooled. Charm also fed resentment. Each person who admired him confirmed the game was working. Each person who believed his performance validated his superiority. Bundy did not love the attention. He controlled it. He harvested it. He did not want to be liked. He wanted to be undeniable, yet beneath this performance, a darker hunger was forming. Charm gave him attention, respect gave him access. Trust gave him opportunity. Soon, these tools would serve a more violent purpose. The mask of charm was almost complete, and behind it grew not simply deceit, but appetite. Bundy's charm was not warmth, it was camouflage. A strategic veneer crafted to hide an internal void and to open doors that would later lead to irreversible harm. The world was beginning to accept him, to welcome him, to trust him. And trust was the most dangerous gift anyone could give him. In every criminal evolution, there is a point where thought begins to outrun behavior. Before actions come impulses, before violence comes imagination. For Ted Bundy, this transition did not erupt suddenly, it crept in quietly, wrapped in secrecy, isolation, and curiosity that began shifting into obsession. During late adolescence and early adulthood, Bundy discovered something deeply dangerous within himself. A growing fascination with power, control, and female vulnerability. What started as typical youthful interest gradually drifted into something colder, darker, and detached from empathy. He did not fantasize about romance or passion, he fantasized about domination. Not love, possession, not connection, control. In private moments, behind closed doors, his inner world developed in ways no one saw. He refined an internal landscape where people were not partners or equals, but objects whose value was measured by how they made him feel powerful. Most individuals have fantasies shaped by emotion, desire, curiosity, or admiration. Bundy's fantasies lacked tenderness, lacked beauty, lacked shared humanity. His imagination followed one path, to command, to overpower, to dictate the fate of another person. He began consuming material that reinforced these impulses. News reports of violent crimes, articles about missing women, images showing power exerted through force. He did not merely view them, he stored them mentally, studied them, built scenarios in his mind where he could replicate that sense of control. He developed a secret habit of seeking isolation, not to rest, but to think deeply, repeatedly, compulsively. In these moments, his mask fell. The polite smile vanished, the practiced manners dissolved, and the internal world that society never saw took shape. He was not imagining affection, he was imagining dominance. Psychology would later describe such early stages as cognitive rehearsal, a preparation stage. Where violent fantasy becomes a mental script, where curiosity forms a pattern, where the mind begins to test boundaries long before the body does. Bundy was rehearsing without action, yet action was slowly becoming inevitable. He recognized this change, but he did not fear it. He did not question it. He did not seek help or confession. Instead, he fed it. Each quiet night alone, each private thought, each consumed image added fuel to a fire that had not yet ignited publicly. Bundy also discovered voyeurism as a tool of power. He watched without being seen. He observed intimacy without participating in it. Peeping, observing, studying women from distances, these behaviors offered him something ordinary interaction never could. A feeling of superiority and secrecy. To see without being seen made him feel invisible and invincible. To observe without engaging allowed him to control the emotional distance. This was not simple curiosity, it was surveillance as emotional nourishment. Predatory observation before predatory action. His mind began dividing the world into two groups, those who mattered as sources of validation and those who existed as instruments for gratification. Even then, the division was subtle, but once a mind begins categorizing people as utilities, the door to dehumanization is open. Bundy stepped through that door quietly, willingly, and without hesitation. He spent hours imagining alternate lives, not fantasies of heroism or success through effort, but fantasies of superiority gained through control. He dreamed not of becoming admired, but of becoming feared, though fear, in his fantasies, was silent, helpless, unseen by the world. He wanted control not publicly, but privately, secretly, absolutely. Social rejection in adolescence did not break him, it shaped him. Each moment where he felt unnoticed, each instance where he felt inferior, planted resentment deep within him. He did not lash out physically at this stage. He lashed out internally, building a world where he was the center and others existed only as extensions of his will. When he discovered pornography, it did not remain casual entertainment. It evolved into something darker, not all pornography, but certain kinds. Content that blurred lines between consent and force. Imagery that reinforced ideas of domination, control, vulnerability. He absorbed it like instruction. He did not watch to feel pleasure alone, he watched to imagine himself in positions of power. He once later admitted that violent imagery shaped his inner world. Not because the images created desire, but because they aligned with an existing hunger he already possessed. They strengthened the impulses, accelerated the fantasies, and removed another internal barrier. At this stage, Bundy did not physically harm anyone, yet the transformation was underway. Predators do not suddenly awaken, they evolve. They sharpen slowly, quietly, until the moment they no longer need fantasy because they are ready to pursue reality. Bundy began realizing something chilling. His internal world satisfied him more than real emotional connection ever could. Real intimacy felt dull, limiting, unpredictable. Fantasy gave him total environment control, every moment, every detail, every outcome. And when a person prefers a world where they alone hold power, real life becomes merely a waiting room for action. He had learned to wear faces. Now he was learning to remove them, not his own, but those of his future victims, stripping them mentally of agency long before he ever touched them. His fantasies were not imagination, they were rehearsal. Rehearsal for control, rehearsal for domination. Rehearsal for violence, the line between thought and action was fading. Soon, imagination would no longer be enough. Soon, the mask would stay on in public and come off in private rooms where no one could stop what the fantasies had prepared him to do. Transformation never begins with a dramatic act. It begins with shifts, subtle, quiet, incremental changes invisible to those around the individual. For Ted Bundy, the early signs were not violent outbursts or obvious aggression. They were breaches in behavior that a normal person might dismiss as curiosity, impulse, or mistake. But for him, they were warnings of a path forming beneath his feet, a path he would not turn away from. In young adulthood, Bundy began testing boundaries, not the socially harmless kind, the psychological kind. He stole items not because he needed them, but because he wanted to feel the thrill of taking without permission. Small thefts, objects of little value, meaningless to the world but significant to him. Crime without necessity is not survival, it is appetite. He also started stalking scenarios that would later define him. Following women at a distance, observing them walk alone. Memorizing patterns, routes, vulnerabilities. These were not impulsive moments, they were controlled exercises. Each silent pursuit was a rehearsal. The world walked confidently around him, unaware that someone was practicing the removal of safety just a few steps behind. Bundy learned something important in these small acts. That wrongdoing, if performed carefully and calmly, often went unnoticed. Not getting caught did not just protect him. It emboldened him. The absence of consequences became permission. He understood that if no one saw the shadow, then the shadow was free to grow. His emotional responses continued to shift. Loss, sympathy, remorse, these feelings did not register in him. Instead, he felt irritation when challenged and satisfaction when unnoticed. When others experienced embarrassment or guilt, he studied those reactions like a scientist observing behavior in a controlled experiment. He noted how shame softened people, how fear silenced them, how kindness could be imitated to disarm suspicion. Bundy was not socially awkward, he was socially calculating. During this period, rejection began to take its toll, not through heartbreak, but through ego. A woman he valued for status and image left him. To most, such a moment might trigger sadness, introspection, attempts at self-improvement. For Bundy, it triggered resolve not to love but to conquer. He worked to rebuild his life externally, not to heal but to prove superiority. He created stability as a stage set, not a transformation. He returned to university, volunteered in political campaigns, shaped his future image with precision. Yet beneath this outward progress lay bitterness, a growing belief that the world owed him recognition. That rejection was not a natural part of life, but an insult to his perceived worth. He learned to hide resentment under confidence, to bury anger beneath charm. But pressure kept building, and pressure seeks release. Some moments broke through the mask. Instances when frustration revealed itself in a tone, a gesture, a flash in his eyes. People who encountered these brief breaks might describe him as suddenly cold, unexpectedly intense, or unsettling without clear cause. These episodes were short, fleeting, but they were real. They showed that beneath the practiced smile and rehearsed politeness, there was a rising current of entitlement and suppressed rage, yet Bundy always recovered quickly. Smoothed his expression, adjusted his tone. Returned to the performance. For every slip, there was correction. For every crack, a repair. This ability to regain composure was not stability. It was discipline. He was learning not just to wear a mask, but to maintain it under pressure. At the same time, his fantasies grew darker, merging more clearly with the real world. He no longer simply imagined control. He planned scenarios where it could exist physically. He thought about situations where someone might trust him deeply enough to follow him somewhere secluded. He imagined surprise, helplessness, silence. Not violence for violence's sake, control for control's sake. Dominion, power, total authority over another human being's safety. He began taking objects from women, not valuables, but items that allowed him to maintain a mental connection. A small possession here, a reminder there. Tokens of potential, not memories, souvenirs of fantasy, not yet of crime. But every item kept was a psychological milestone. Possession is a form of power, even when the subject is unaware. Neighbors, classmates, colleagues, none saw the danger. He was still polite, still quiet, still reliable. Still the respectable young man with potential. Still the one who smiled at the right time. Still the man who could sit beside someone and make them feel perfectly safe. But inside him, the balance was shifting. He no longer felt disguised by normalcy. He felt imprisoned by it. Normal life became not a comfort but an obstacle. Routine did not satisfy him. Achievement did not satisfy him. Attention did not satisfy him. Control was the only thing that satisfied him. And control in fantasy was no longer enough. The first cracks in the mask did not make noise. No alarm sounded, no warning reached the world beyond him. He continued his life uninterrupted, unnoticed, and underestimated, but the fracture was real. And once the mask begins to crack, the face beneath it starts looking for a way out. Soon, the rehearsals would end. Soon, fantasy would not be enough. Soon, the quiet observer would become the active predator. The world still believed in the polite young man with promise. The world did not yet see the hunger developing behind his eyes. But hunger, once awakened, does not return to sleep. There is a moment in the evolution of a predator when curiosity becomes intention. When the mind no longer wanders into darkness occasionally, but begins walking toward it with purpose. Ted Bundy reached that threshold quietly, without spectacle, without confession. The world around him remained unaware, while inside him, instinct shifted into strategy. Bundy did not simply decide to hunt one day. His transition was gradual, calculated, and shaped by growing confidence in his ability to deceive. The more he blended into society, the more power he felt over it. He had mastered appearing harmless. Now, he sought opportunities to test how invisible he truly was. He began studying environments, not just individuals, observing patterns in public spaces. Noting when women walked alone, when streets grew quiet, when campus pathways emptied, he learned schedules, rhythms, vulnerabilities. Ordinary people saw familiar routines, Bundy saw openings. He discovered how predictable human behavior could be. Students leaving libraries at certain hours. Young women carrying books alone, apartments with lights off at routine times. Parking lots with blind corners and broken lamps. Nothing seemed dangerous to others, and that was what attracted him. Bundy walked through neighborhoods not as a resident but as a surveyor. He learned that predators do not search randomly. They wait, they watch, they choose. They select a moment when trust, habit, and routine create the perfect blindness. To hunt effectively, he needed to understand patterns, and he did. His belief that he could manipulate perception strengthened. If he approached someone politely, he received a smile. If he offered a kind voice, he earned trust. If he presented vulnerability, a cast, a limp, a request for help, people stepped closer willingly. Bundy learned that prey can walk into danger willingly when the predator speaks softly enough. At this stage, there were no abductions yet, but the blueprint was forming. He practiced approaching strangers casually, asking questions, engaging in small talk. Every interaction taught him which tone worked best, which expressions seemed sincere, how to position his body to avoid suspicion. He refined his help-me persona, knowing one day it would be a key. He tested doors of human kindness, and each one opened. He also learned terrain. Forests, side roads, empty parking areas. Remote spaces near lakes and parks, places where voices disappeared, where time slowed, where no unexpected witnesses passed by. He walked these areas not for recreation but reconnaissance. This was preparation disguised as exercise, exploration, routine. Social life became a cloak rather than a connection. He attended gatherings, smiled in photos, joined conversations, not to feel part of society, but to anchor himself deeper inside it while his internal life drifted further away. The contrast widened between who he appeared to be and who he was becoming. Bundy's mind now moved in two worlds simultaneously. In one, he was a polite university student exchanging normal greetings. In the other, he was imagining scenarios where those same people would have no idea he was capable of harm. This dual existence strengthened his sense of superiority. Not only could he mimic humanity, he could stand among it undetected while nurturing intentions that belonged outside of it. The psychology behind this phase reveals something critical. Power for Bundy was not only domination, it was secrecy. The idea that no one suspected him became a source of satisfaction. The fact that people trusted his smile fed his sense of advantage. Every friendly interaction was proof that society was blind to danger that didn't fit its expectations. He became selective in his attention. He observed particular types of women, young, independent, trusting, free-spirited. Not because they wronged him, not because he hated them individually, but because they represented something he believed he was denied, effortless social validation. Their confidence reminded him of what he never naturally possessed. To control them mentally, to imagine overpowering them physically became his way of reclaiming power he felt the world withheld. Bundy did not fantasize about killing at first, he fantasized about possession. But possession and harm grow close together when empathy is absent. Soon, control alone was not enough. He did not want to be seen as powerful. He wanted to feel it entirely, without resistance, without witnesses, without limits. Internal hesitation faded, fear diminished. Morality, already weak, dissolved under ambition and secrecy. He rehearsed lies, practiced alibis in his mind, imagined calmness in hypothetical confrontations. He prepared not only to act but to appear innocent afterward. He was not planning a crime. He was planning a life where crime existed alongside acceptance. The predator was nearly formed. No one saw it. No one suspected it. He still held doors open, still smiled politely, still blended in seamlessly. But he was no longer merely hiding who he was. He was cultivating who he would become. Bundy did not rush. He waited for moments to align. He waited until he felt ready. Predators who rely on rage strike impulsively. Bundy relied on calculation. He was not preparing to explode. He was preparing to select. Soon, fantasy would find opportunity. Soon, the mask would not simply hide him. It would bring victims closer. Soon, the world would encounter not a man losing control, but a man exercising it fully for the first time. The hunter was now awake. All he needed was a moment, and the world had never been quieter. Predators rely on advantage. Some use force, some use threats. Ted Bundy used trust. His method was not built on intimidation. It was engineered around appearing safe, familiar, even fragile. The world would later imagine monsters hiding in shadows, but Bundy discovered something far more effective. Monsters hiding in daylight, holding books, wearing clean clothes, smiling politely. By the time he reached this phase of his evolution, his strategy was clear. He did not chase victims. He invited them into danger. He created a scenario where they chose to step closer, convinced they were helping someone, not fearing someone. The first element of his approach was presentation. Bundy understood optics, clean haircut, soft-spoken tone, eye contact that suggested sincerity rather than threat. He learned to ask for help in a way that triggered instinctive empathy. People want to be helpful, especially towards someone who looks respectable. Bundy relied on this universal instinct with precision. The second element was vulnerability. He practiced appearing weakened. A cast on his arm, books dropped from his hands. A request to lift something into a car. No one expects danger from a man who seems physically limited. Bundy weaponized helplessness. His false fragility became a tool sharper than a blade. The third element was familiarity. He approached in daylight near public places. He spoke casually, used polite phrases, acted slightly shy. He did not seem predatory. He seemed awkward, harmless, maybe even grateful. This was not hunting in darkness. This was luring in plain sight. He learned the importance of control not through strength, but through timing. If a woman hesitated, he backed away slightly, smiled, reassured her. He let them decide to help. That decision gave him psychological power long before physical power mattered. Once trust was offered voluntarily, resistance decreased. Not because force was applied, but because the brain settled into comfort before danger arrived. He observed patterns: women alone near parking lots, public spaces with privacy pockets, libraries, campuses, late afternoon walkways. He studied when footsteps were isolated, when campus traffic slowed, when opportunities aligned perfectly. Selection was never random. Routine and trust built the stage. Bundy merely entered when the script was ready. In these early encounters, he discovered patience, predators who lose control. Bundy waited for the right tone in conversation, the correct moment to step closer, the precise second when suspicion lowered and empathy rose. He approached with method, not emotion. There was no anger in his voice, no aggression in his stance. Only calm intent, hidden under gentle behavior. Victims did not sense danger because they were not supposed to. Human intuition often responds to emotional threat, raised voices, aggressive posture, visible hostility. Bundy offered none of these. He replaced threat with courtesy, aggression with gratitude, danger with need. By the time fear could surface, choices had been made and direction was already set. He rehearsed responses to questions, practiced tone, refined gestures. He learned that if he seemed slightly embarrassed asking for help, suspicion vanished faster. He perfected the art of appearing non-threatening because appearing harmless was his ultimate weapon. The tragedy is not only in his actions but in how easily kindness became vulnerability. How instinctive trust became a doorway. How ordinary human empathy was turned against those who offered it. Bundy understood that the world taught women to be polite, helpful, patient, and he exploited those lessons mercilessly. No costume meant danger. No threat announced itself. Bundy was proof that danger can smile, speak softly, and carry books instead of weapons. That a predator can sound like a friend asking for a favor. Before his crimes became known, no system existed to detect a man like him. Polite men were trusted, clean-cut men were respected. Soft-voiced men were presumed gentle. Bundy turned these social rules into instruments of control. He did not force his way into people's lives, he asked. He smiled, he waited. And people walked willingly into situations they believed were safe. Believed because they saw what they expected to see. A good man needing help, not a predator preparing silence. This chapter of his development marks the final shift from fantasy to planned behavior. The mask was not only convincing, it was functional. The approach was no longer practice, it was strategy. He had learned how to open doors without touching them, how to guide footsteps without raising suspicion, how to turn politeness into a trap and compassion into compliance. At this stage, he was not simply capable of harm. He was capable of making others enable it unknowingly. The hunter no longer stalked from afar. He stood in front of people, made eye contact, spoke softly, and let victims walk closer on their own. The world still believed criminals looked threatening. Bundy knew better. And soon, the world would learn that monsters do not always break in. Sometimes they ask politely to take something to the car. Universities are built on trust, open lawns, unlocked doors, familiar routines, crowded libraries, late-night study sessions, environments where danger feels impossible. In the early 1970s, campuses across the Pacific Northwest embodied freedom and optimism. Students walked alone at night. Dorm windows were left open for fresh air. Friends parted ways after class without fear, expecting to see each other the next day. In this atmosphere, the first disappearances seemed unthinkable. When young women began vanishing from college grounds in Washington and Oregon, confusion filled the air long before fear did. No broken windows, no screams, no witnesses. They were simply there one moment and gone the next. Friends reported them late to class. Roommates thought they went home for the weekend. Faculty assumed they withdrew quietly. No one imagined something systematic was forming in the shadows of routine life. Bundy's comfort in these settings gave him an advantage. He blended in with students carrying books, walking between lecture halls, drinking coffee on campus benches. He did not arrive like a threat. He belonged there. He knew the rhythms of university life because he lived among them. He understood the innocence of young academic ambition, the trust between peers, the absence of defensive instincts in spaces where knowledge, not danger, was expected. When disappearances were finally noticed, explanations struggled to keep up. Some believed the women left voluntarily. Some thought they were escaping stress or relationship issues. Media coverage at first treated the incidents separately, not as part of a pattern. University administrators hesitated to alarm students. Communities preferred comforting explanations over frightening possibilities. Silence and denial became as dangerous as the predator moving among them. Bundy watched this uncertainty unfold and learned from it. He saw how society hesitated to accept threat without visible evidence. He understood that horror was easier to ignore when it lacked a face. Each successful disappearance reinforced his belief that intelligence and patience could outmatch law enforcement and public awareness. The absence of panic was not coincidence, it was exploitation. Patterns began forming, women with similar physical characteristics, late afternoon or evening disappearances. Library areas, dorm parking lots, student housing paths, campus plazas. Places busy enough to feel safe, quiet enough to isolate a moment. The precision of these disappearances revealed planning, not impulse. Bundy was not reacting emotionally, he was executing a method. People noticed only fragments: a polite man asking for help, a sling, a cast, a Volkswagen near student paths. But fragments mean little without connection, and connection requires suspicion. Suspicion requires imagination, and in peaceful academic environments, imagination rarely turns toward predation. Trust was the norm, caution the exception. Police departments initially lacked coordination. Jurisdictional boundaries divided information. Reports filed in one city did not travel quickly to another. Investigators worked cases independently, unaware their suspect crossed state lines, changed routines, shifted hunting grounds as easily as a student switching classrooms. Bundy moved freely, unnoticed and unchallenged. Fear finally began to take hold, not through evidence but through accumulation. Missing posters multiplied. Friends whispered during cafeteria conversations. Parents called campus offices. Campus security increased, yet still struggled to comprehend the nature of the threat. A serial predator operating in academic settings was not part of the collective imagination. Such individuals, society believed, came from dark corners, not from classrooms and political offices, not from the young man who looked like he had a bright future. Students started walking in pairs, libraries emptied earlier. A quiet tension fell over dorm hallways as whispers spread. Someone was targeting them, someone familiar, someone who could blend with the crowd. Still, many hesitated to believe the scale of what was happening. Trust does not disappear as quickly as people do. Bundy thrived in that hesitation. He did not rush. He did not change his demeanor. He simply continued moving through campus spaces like a student among students, calmly operating beneath recognition. No one screamed when he approached. No one ran. They listened. They helped. They trusted. What vanished first was not safety. It was certainty. Students who once walked freely now measured footsteps. Conversations shifted from dreams of the future to questions of survival. Yet even then, the full truth remained hidden. The community sensed danger, but they could not name it. Law enforcement sensed a pattern, but could not catch it. Bundy knew this confusion was his greatest advantage. The university, a place built for growth and curiosity, unknowingly became his hunting ground. Where others came to expand their minds, he came to tighten control. Where others pursued knowledge, he pursued vulnerability. Where others sought a future, he sought opportunity hidden in routine. By the time fear matured into alarm, Bundy had already mastered his environment. The campus did not create his darkness, but it gave him the perfect stage to refine it. A place where trust lived openly and suspicion stayed quiet. A place where the line between safety and danger vanished silently. Just like the women who walked into the wrong moment, believing the world around them was still the place they thought it was. There are criminals who hide in darkness, avoiding public life, shrinking from attention. Ted Bundy chose the opposite. He did not disappear into isolation. He inserted himself into society. He worked, studied, socialized, dated, participated in politics, smiled in photographs, and shook hands with confidence. While the country searched for a phantom, the phantom attended law classes. He sat in lecture halls learning the system that would later try to hold him. He discussed justice with peers who never sensed they were speaking to someone who believed he was above it. Bundy's ability to maintain two identities was not accidental. It was a skill refined over years of practice. The outward Ted presented ambition, discipline, and charm. He dated. He built friendships. He offered compliments freely and listened to others with what seemed like patience and sincerity. He played roles so convincingly that few would ever doubt his integrity. People trusted him not because they were naive, but because he left no room for doubt. He worked as a crisis hotline volunteer, a position that would seem paradoxical in hindsight. To some, he sounded calm, supportive, compassionate. Those who worked beside him later struggled to reconcile the truth. How could someone capable of listening to despair and comforting strangers also be capable of creating despair in others? How could someone help save lives while quietly planning to take them? Bundy's relationships deepened the illusion. He could be gentle, thoughtful, even affectionate when it served him. He bought gifts, attended dinners, remembered birthdays. He held hands, kissed softly, spoke about the future. He seemed attentive and protective. To partners, he could appear like a potential husband, a man with ambition and a steady path. But behind every romantic gesture was calculation, not connection. He liked being admired more than he liked anyone. Love was not emotion, it was validation and camouflage. He also cultivated academic identity. Politics fascinated him. Not for public service, but for performance. Campaign offices saw him as promising, articulate, driven. He learned how to speak in measured tones, how to appear serious and committed. Success in these spaces fed his belief that he was smarter than those around him, capable of playing every role better than those who lived them genuinely. This was not duality born from confusion, it was duality born from superiority. Bundy did not feel torn between two worlds, he felt entitled to both. He believed he deserved admiration and control, public respect and private dominance. In his mind, there was no contradiction. The polite young man and the predator were not separate personalities, they were two instruments serving one ambition, power without restriction. He mirrored emotions without feeling them. He cared when others were watching and stopped caring once they looked away. He supported friends when support gave him social credit. He comforted loved ones if it reinforced loyalty. People were not companions, they were scaffolding for his image. Those close to him occasionally sensed emotional emptiness, moments when he seemed distant, unreachable, flat. But he always recovered quickly, offering explanations, apologies, or tenderness if necessary. He mastered emotional surface without emotional depth. Every interaction was performance, and he was the actor who never forgot his script. Meanwhile, his private behaviors intensified. He continued stalking spaces where vulnerability lived, libraries, parking lots, remote campus paths. He knew where safety disappeared. He knew when fear would not be heard. He followed routines faithfully, but his routines were surveillance, not study habits. He was not preparing for exams, he was preparing for opportunity. This balance, social acceptance by day, predatory exploration by night, strengthened his confidence. He confirmed to himself that he could exist in both worlds without contradiction or consequence. Each day that passed without suspicion reinforced his belief in his own superiority. Each successful interaction with friends or classmates deepened his conviction that he could play life better than those who lived it honestly. Evil does not always announce itself with rage or chaos. Sometimes it attends dinner parties, shakes hands politely, and helps carry groceries. Sometimes it pretends to sleep beside someone who trusts it completely, while dreaming of silence and control. Bundy embodied this contradiction perfectly, not because he struggled with identity, but because he felt none. To those who knew him, he was a smart, charming, ambitious young man. To the world, he looked like potential. To himself, he looked like a man who had outgrown rules and morality. And to the women who unknowingly crossed his path, he was the most dangerous type of predator, one who could walk among them unnoticed, holding to lives in one body. Never losing balance, never slipping, never giving a hint of the hunger beneath his calm exterior, the world still believed him harmless. Friends trusted him. Partners loved him. Teachers approved of him. Communities welcomed him. And in that acceptance, he found the perfect shield. A shield that allowed him to live one life in the open and another in silence, waiting for the next moment when trust would step forward and innocence would stand alone. Soon, even to lives would not be enough to satisfy him. Soon, he would no longer hide behind normalcy. He would use normalcy as a weapon. The mask was secure. The performance polished, the man admired. And beneath it all, the predator prepared for escalation. Every predator reaches a point where preparation is no longer enough. Ted Bundy entered this phase quietly, not in rage, not in panic, but in decision. The distance between thought and action narrowed, fantasies hardened into plans. And the desire for dominance demanded real-world expression. At first, Bundy tested boundaries cautiously. Late-night drives without clear purpose, aimless walks near student housing. Parking near wooded areas under the guise of study breaks. He was not lost, he was looking for moments where routine thinned, where footsteps isolated, where hesitation lived. He began choosing times of day that offered both opportunity and illusion of safety. Late evenings, not midnight. Busy enough that his presence seemed natural, empty enough that no one noticed small movements. He learned that danger is most effective in moments that appear harmless. Internal hesitation, once present, dissolved. There was no moral debate, no internal struggle, no emerging guilt. The only question left in him was when. He had rehearsed approach, tested charm, perfected the helpless persona. He knew how to speak, how to smile, how to lower suspicion. Now, he sought the final ingredient, isolation. Bundy's internal compass did not swing between right and wrong, it calculated risk and reward. He measured shadows, escape routes, blind corners, and the timing of passing cars. He thought of questions officers might ask and prepared answers long before any confrontation. He built alibis in advance, quietly arranging pieces that would suggest innocence if anyone ever wondered where he had been. He also monitored emotional triggers, or the absence of them. A normal man might feel guilt at a disturbing thought. Bundy felt irritation when his plans were interrupted. A normal man might feel anxiety at the idea of harming someone. Bundy felt anticipation, focus, and increasing confidence. Isolation from real emotion continued. Relationships existed, but they did not anchor him. Affection offered to girlfriends or friends was transactional, scripted, emptied of humanity. He knew how to touch gently, how to listen carefully, how to speak softly. But none of it belonged to truth. It was camouflage, strengthened by practice and reinforced by success. Meanwhile, his fantasies sharpened into detailed scenarios. He no longer imagined general control. He envisioned specific acts, specific settings, specific resistance he would enjoy overcoming. He rehearsed not only the approach, but the aftermath, how he would return home, how he would breathe normally, how he would speak calmly the next morning. He did not plan how to conceal guilt. He planned how to conceal calm. This was not frenzy. It was evolution. A predator shedding the last constraints of social instinct. One of the most chilling aspects of Bundy's escalation was his ability to function normally during this transition. He attended gatherings, he studied, he laughed at jokes he did not feel. He shook hands firmly, offered sympathy when others faced stress, supported friends with carefully chosen words. All the while, he carried the growing secret. He was ready to harm, and soon he would. Criminologists later noted something critical about this phase. Bundy did not escalate because of emotional breakdown or external crisis. He escalated because he felt capable. He escalated because life in disguise became boring. Normal interactions could no longer satisfy him. Pretending to belong felt like a cage rather than protection. Violence did not erupt, it arrived, silent. Methodical, deliberate. Bundy crossed the threshold the same way he did everything else, with calculation, discipline, and a chilling absence of hesitation. He began rehearsing physical actions in small ways, lifting heavy objects, adjusting grips, testing how close he could stand to someone without seeming threatening. He practiced vulnerability tactics, fumbling keys, awkwardly opening doors, carrying books in a way that demanded assistance. Predators refined tools, Bundy refined behavior. Around this time, he also learned a new kind of pleasure, the thrill of proximity to fear before fear is recognized. Not the moment of attack, but the seconds before it, when the world still believes it is safe. He found satisfaction in knowing that he could make someone feel comfortable moments before destroying their sense of reality. Control was not merely physical, it was psychological supremacy. The mask stayed intact, only strengthening as his internal world darkened. Friends and colleagues saw him growing, confident, mature, composed. He spoke of futures, careers, goals. He shook hands with leaders, volunteered in campaigns, earned trust from strangers. He was praised for discipline, admired for ambition, respected for intelligence. But discipline was not guiding him toward success. It was guiding him toward execution of another kind. Every polite greeting, every friendly smile, every studied gesture became part of a strategy that would let him walk freely in daylight after doing unthinkable things in darkness. He was preparing not only to act, but to continue living normally afterward. Predators often fear being caught. Bundy feared being ordinary. His crimes were not escape from weakness, they were proof of power. By this stage, the man the world thought he was and the predator he truly became no longer conflicted. They worked together, the mask protected the hunter, and the hunter gave purpose to the mask. Soon, isolation would no longer be preparation, it would be selection. Soon, opportunity would become action. Soon, campus safety would become illusion. And soon, the country would discover that evil does not always rise suddenly. Sometimes it grows quietly, patiently, step by step, until the moment patience ends and darkness finally steps forward. Predators often seek domination in the moment. Ted Bundy sought something more enduring, possession beyond presence. To him, control did not end when physical contact did. Control was a memory he wanted to own, an echo he needed to keep, proof that his power extended long after the world believed it safe again. This is where the trophy mentality formed, not souvenirs of affection, but artifacts of dominance. Bundy believed that if he touched a life, it belonged to him. Not symbolically, literally, a strand of hair, an item of clothing, a personal object. Every held fragment was a reminder that a human being's final moments existed because he chose it. Power did not only exist in the act, it lived in the keeping. At first, his trophies were simple, items unnoticed by others, objects small enough to hide anywhere. Not valuable, not dramatic, not the kind of thing one would report missing. A bracelet, a program pamphlet, a photograph taken from a desk. Anything that carried emotional meaning to the victim, even if that meaning was invisible to everyone else. Bundy did not need these objects as memories. He did not miss them emotionally. He kept them for psychological reinforcement. To look at something and know that it represented a moment where another human being's will disappeared beneath his, that was enough. It was confirmation that he was not merely living life. He was taking life and shaping it into extension of himself. Where others see items, predators like Bundy see validation. Not proof to display, proof to revisit. Possessions become victories, sealed away not as guilt but as triumph. Bundy's trophies were not tokens of sentiment. They were monuments to supremacy. He also returned to locations privately. Not often, not predictably, but enough to feed the illusion that time did not erase what he had done. Silence and isolation did not disturb him, they strengthened him. He walked where footsteps once panicked, he stood where fear had once lived. He breathed calmly in places where screams once died. To him, this was not haunting, it was conquering the moment twice. And in repeating the moment, he felt power again without needing to act. Bundy's psychological landscape did not revolve around anger or hatred. His trophies did not reflect rage, they reflected ownership. He did not keep reminders to remember victims, he kept them to forget their humanity. Once a life had been reduced to an object, it no longer mattered who she was. Only that she once existed, and now she didn't because he decided so. There is a chilling logic to this mindset. When a person becomes an object, harming them is not violence, it is usage. Once reduced to a thing, a life becomes a collectible, a symbol of personal achievement rather than personal destruction. Bundy did not see tragedy in loss, he saw accomplishment in control. Outside this internal world, he maintained his normal face. He attended social events, he worked. He laughed quietly at jokes, walked among crowds, and even showed polite sadness when others suffered unrelated losses. Inside, trophies lived like private medals arranged in invisible order. Praise from society and trophies from victims served the same purpose, to remind him he was capable of shaping reality to suit himself. Psychology tells us that trophies serve one primary function for predators: continuation of the high. If the act itself is power, the trophy becomes fuel for future hunger. Every item whispered that he could take again. Every object reminded him that rules did not apply. Every hidden fragment told him he was smarter, more capable, more deserving of power than those who trusted the world around them. Bundy also used trophies for planning. He did not simply cherish them, he studied them. He remembered what worked, what didn't, what details mattered, what mistakes to avoid. His trophies were not sentimental, they were data. Evidence not of regret, but of refinement. Victims did not fade in his memory. They froze there, preserved not as people, but as moments of conquest. The world mourned them, Bundy archived them. And in those archives, his identity became more rooted in control than in humanity. The world around him continued believing he was progressing, a student on track, a young man with drive, a citizen with potential. Yet the private collection forming inside his mind and in hidden corners of his environment told a different truth. He was already far removed from ordinary human boundaries. He no longer needed society's approval, only its blindness. Trophies confirmed that he could live into timelines at once. In one, he shook hands and took notes in university lecture halls. In the other, he revisited the quiet weight of something taken, knowing only he understood its meaning. Bundy's collection was not physical storehouse alone, it was psychological gallery. Each piece reminded him that he had crossed a line most could never imagine. Each reminder made it easier to cross again. And with every item kept, every sight revisited, every memory replayed like a ritual, his descent deepened. Trophies do not mark the end of morality. They mark the burial of it. Bundy no longer stood on the edge of violence. He lived beyond it, unable and unwilling to return. Soon, objects would no longer be enough. Achievement would demand escalation again. A predator satisfied only temporarily must hunt again. And Bundy, fueled by proof of his dominance, prepared not just to repeat his actions, but to amplify them. Danger is easiest to ignore when it does not fit the image of what danger should look like. By the time women were disappearing across states, communities were uneasy. Yet America did not panic. Not truly. Not yet. The idea that someone intelligent, polite, college-educated, and well-spoken could be systematically hunting women did not align with cultural expectations of a predator. People imagined crime wearing rough edges. Bundy wore confidence and clean sweaters. Society trusted appearances, and Bundy understood this better than anyone. He smiled, shook hands, asked friendly questions, and carried himself as a young man with a future. In a world where social status and politeness could substitute for character, he passed every test the public subconsciously applied. Communities prefer to believe good things about familiar faces. Bundy weaponized that impulse. Even as missing posters multiplied, the public still clung to explanations that felt safer than truth. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she moved without telling anyone. Young people disappear sometimes. Excuses flowed more comfortably than fear. It was easier to assume coincidence than acknowledge a predator walking freely among students, neighbors, and co-workers. When investigators first shared descriptions, the response was confusion rather than alarm. A young man with tailored manners, a soft voice, a law student, a volunteer at a crisis hotline. No, monsters lived in alleys, not classrooms. They lurked under bridges, not in libraries. They did not hold campaign pamphlets or discuss legislation. Bundy exploited every flaw in the public's imagination. He understood that society does not fear what feels familiar, it fears what feels foreign. So he became familiar, approachable, articulate, helpful. He even accompanied friends to search meetings, discussing the danger that he himself created. Hints, when they appeared, were brushed aside not because they lacked merit, but because they lacked comfort. Police, too, struggled with disbelief. Not for lack of effort, but for lack of a mental model that fit him. There had been serial killers before, but few who looked like success instead of failure. Bundy did not match what danger was supposed to look like. Civility became his shield. Education became his disguise. Ambition became his camouflage. When a pattern finally emerged, similar victims, similar circumstances, similar environments, denial still lingered. Communities hesitated to believe that someone could infiltrate society so seamlessly while committing horrific acts. Suspects were examined, questioned, crossed off lists. Bundy remained in plain sight, untouched by suspicion strong enough to restrain him. He even landed on an early list of possible names, yet survived it because confidence and charm weighed heavier than logic and caution. Friends vouched for him, romantic partners defended him. Co-workers laughed at the suggestion that someone so polite, so intelligent, so composed could be involved in violence. People do not want to believe that evil can wear a friendly face, so they reject the idea instinctively. Bundy understood this instinct intimately and used it as a tool sharper than any weapon he ever held. America of the 1970s lived with optimism. Young people trusted their campuses. Police believed interstate cooperation was rarely necessary. Parents allowed daughters to study far from home with confidence. Bundy operated in a society built on trust, and every layer of that trust made his work easier. Students surrounded by friends during the day walked alone at night without fear. Campus lanterns glowed softly but not brightly enough to protect. Libraries encouraged solitude, parking lots stretched open with shadows in the corners. Independence was celebrated, personal caution rarely enforced. When early newspaper reports surfaced, society reacted with curiosity, not terror. When warnings circulated, many dismissed them as rumor. It was easier to believe that fear exaggerated reality than to accept a predator was selecting victims with intelligence, patience, and planning. Denial was not ignorance, it was self-protection. Believing nightmare scenarios feels unbearable. Doubting them feels safe, and Bundy thrived in safety. He thrived in assumptions. He thrived in every moment that society chose comfort over suspicion. Women changed routines slowly, not immediately. Parents advised caution, but life continued. Students whispered warnings but still walked alone if the night seemed calm. Even as fear grew, disbelief prevented full alarm. Bundy maneuvered through this world with disturbing ease. When suspicions surfaced, he smiled. When police knocked, he answered politely. When questioned, he spoke calmly, rationally, politely. His voice gained more trust than witness descriptions. His demeanor weighed heavier than evidence still in fragments. This chapter of his life reveals not his genius, but our vulnerability. Society did not fail because it was foolish. It failed because it was human. People trust what looks safe. They trust smiles. They trust education. They trust confidence. They trust the familiar over the frightening. Bundy built his safety net from these truths. While authorities connected dots painstakingly, he continued forward without hesitation. While communities whispered, he acted. While the nation hesitated to believe what he truly was, he exploited the hesitation fully. Denial is powerful, not because it hides truth, but because it delays it. And every moment of delay gave Bundy room to continue his work. Eventually, awareness would grow, patterns would tighten, panic would build, but before panic comes disbelief, and disbelief is the predator's first victory. America did not simply fail to see him, it refused to. Because accepting him meant accepting that evil can look ordinary, and that is the most frightening truth of all. When disappearances continued, law enforcement no longer faced isolated incidents, they faced a pattern. But patterns do not immediately reveal predators, they first reveal confusion. Police departments across states held pieces of a puzzle without knowing they belonged to the same picture: a missing student in Washington, another in Oregon, rumors in Utah, whispers in Colorado. For states hundreds of miles apart, and no framework yet existed to bind them. Investigators were trained for single-event offenders, not roving predators who crossed state lines, changed cars, adjusted routines, and adapted almost faster than reports could circulate. Bundy did not move like a criminal, he moved like a student changing campuses or a campaign volunteer traveling for work. His mobility made tracking him nearly impossible in a system not yet built for coordination. The earliest investigative attempts relied on witness memories, fragile, inconsistent, shaped by stress and time. A young man, dark hair, polite voice, driving a light-colored Volkswagen, a name, Ted. Yet even with fragments aligning, investigators faced a problem. When the suspect looks ordinary, ordinary skepticism slows pursuit. Task forces formed reluctantly, first small, then larger. Detectives exchanged files by hand, not computers. Phone logs, handwritten notes, student records, campus security reports, all reviewed slowly, manually. Every case had similarities, yet each community believed their tragedy was unique, local, isolated. It took time for agencies to admit something more dangerous was moving, not stationary. Bundy followed the investigation with the same attentiveness he applied to selecting victims. He read news carefully. He monitored rumors. He studied law enforcement language and public statements. He adjusted tactics when he sensed pressure, altered routines when he heard speculation, shifted locations when heat rose. He was not simply avoiding police, he was learning them. Investigators, for their part, worked without cynicism. They searched forests, interviewed friends and family, canvassed campuses. They followed tips from frightened students, grieving parents, and bystanders who sensed something wrong but could not articulate it. They felt the weight of rising fear yet lacked a solid target. Psychological profiling was in its infancy. No established tools existed to predict a predator like him. Criminologists had theories, but few precedents. Serial crime was not yet a category, it was an emerging, deeply uncomfortable reality forming in real time. As the list of missing women grew, investigators began mapping abduction sites, searching for geographic logic. But maps did not reveal patterns clearly when the offender did not stay loyal to one territory. Bundy floated between college towns, lived in cities filled with young people, Seattle, Salt Lake City, Denver, places where movement appeared normal and strangers blended in without question. He attended law school during parts of this period, which gave him access to knowledge others lacked. He studied investigative procedure, courtroom strategies, evidence rules. He knew how detectives worked and what prosecutors needed. He planned not only how to commit crimes, but how to survive accusation. He prepared for suspicion long before anyone asked his name. When investigators circulated a suspect list, Ted Bundy's name did appear. Not once, but more than once. Yet suspicion did not solidify. A polite volunteer at a crisis center. a clean-cut student with political aspirations, a helpful young man who smiled warmly and spoke intelligently. To many people believed in his potential, to many vouched for his character. Charm and normalcy outweighed instinct and pattern recognition. Even when someone close to him called police in concern, it was not accusation, it was confusion. He did not look like danger. He looked like promise, and promise protects. While police built timelines, Bundy built distance, both literal and emotional. He used changing environments as camouflage. He varied his tactics slightly, adjusted travel patterns, switched approaches, never creating a perfect trail. He was not perfect, but the system was not prepared. Investigators worked nights, pinned photos to boards, marked maps with thread and ink, held press conferences where facts felt slippery, incomplete, heartbreaking. They chased shadows, unsure if they hunted one man or many. Each lead brought hope, each dead end brought exhaustion. Parents feared phone calls after dark. Campus lights stayed on later. Women walked in groups, then still disappeared. Rumor evolved into dread. Communities lost innocence long before they gained clarity. Bundy, meanwhile, moved through society untouched. He attended gatherings as headlines whispered his existence. He drank coffee while police sketched his silhouette. He spoke kindly to strangers the same week investigators dug through forests in despair. He was not invisible. He was worse. He was seen and dismissed. Hunting him was not failure, it was evolution. Law enforcement learned in real time how to pursue a predator who mimicked normalcy perfectly. Systems strengthened, cooperation improved. Patterns finally merged into recognition. But every step toward understanding cost lives. Serial predation forces society to mature painfully. Trust shrinks, systems adapt, investigators change tactics, and the world learns that evil does not always wear desperation. Sometimes it wears ambition, charm, and clean clothes. The ghost was becoming visible, but visibility did not yet mean capture. Understanding did not yet mean containment. The hunt continued, and Bundy, believing himself untouchable, prepared for escalation that would soon push him beyond the Pacific Northwest. He felt smarter than the system. He believed he could outrun structure, law, suspicion, and for a time he did. But ghosts, once seen, can no longer hide forever. And slowly, painfully, the outline of his face began to take form. Not in the minds of victims, but in the minds of those chasing him step by step, while he walked calmly ahead. He did not enter the courtroom as a man cornered by guilt. He walked in as though stepping onto a stage he believed he deserved, one built not for justice but for attention. His suit was carefully chosen, his hair combed with precision, his expressions rehearsed in the mirror of his own ego. Every movement was calculated, every breath controlled, as if the air itself were part of his script. To him, this was not a trial. This was a performance, a grand production in which he would prove not innocence but brilliance. He carried himself like the world had misunderstood him, and the courtroom was his moment of clarity, where truth would bend under the weight of his charm. He dismissed lawyers not because they failed him, but because they stole his spotlight. Representing himself was not defense strategy, but an act of self-worship. He believed no one could speak for him better than he could, because in his mind, he was always the smartest man in the room. He stood before the judge with the arrogance of someone who mistook theatrical confidence for legal strength. His voice moved like a conductor guiding an invisible orchestra, shifting from calm control to sharp indignation, designed to leave an impression rather than present facts. He thought persuasion was a weapon sharper than evidence, and ego was armor stronger than truth. When he addressed the jury, he spoke as though preaching to a crowd of admirers. He leaned forward slightly, as if sharing secrets only geniuses understood. His eyes held a false sincerity, practiced to perfection, a mask polished so many times he no longer remembered the face underneath. He paused for effect, believing silence could hypnotize, believing tone could override horror. Every word was chosen not to defend innocence but to sculpt legacy. He never feared their judgment, he feared their indifference. He did not want freedom, he wanted fascination. He wanted to be remembered, and in that pursuit he treated his trial like an audition for infamy, cross-examining witnesses. He did not seek truth. He sought dominance. His questions dug not for clarity but for control, turning pain into a battlefield where he could feel powerful once more. Victims' families watched in disbelief as he twisted grief into spectacle, as if suffering was merely a stage effect meant to highlight his intellect. He leaned closer, his voice lowering, not out of sensitivity but out of predatory instinct. Each time he tried to discredit someone, each time he raised his hand in objection with feigned outrage, he believed he regained authority over a world slipping from his grasp. He mistook cruelty for strength and performance for persuasion. He watched cameras the way some men watch mirrors, searching for angles, adjusting expressions, lingering on moments where sympathy might bloom. He offered smiles without warmth, charm without humanity. To the media, he was not a defendant, he was a character. He fed off every flash, every whisper, every headline, like attention was oxygen and silence was death. His interviews were not pleas. They were monologues. Every answer served ego. Every phrase served myth. He wanted to create a narrative where he was the complicated genius, the misunderstood man, the figure too unique to fit the ordinary mold of guilt. But beneath the surface of calm confidence lived cracks. When objections were overruled, when arguments collapsed, when witnesses stood strong, a flicker passed through his mask. A tightening jaw, a brief tremor of the eyes, a whisper of panic immediately suffocated by pride. He hated losing control more than he feared punishment. Arrogance kept him upright, but doubt not at corners he refused to acknowledge. He was like a man trying to command a storm by raising his voice, believing the world must obey because he demanded it. He could not comprehend that a stage could exist where he was not the leading figure. As evidence mounted like walls closing in, he doubled down. He stared at photographs with empty eyes, listened to testimonies with a smirk as if tragedy existed only to frustrate him, not define him. When prosecutors pressed harder, he smiled wider, clinging to the belief that confidence could rewrite reality. But performance cannot erase truth. Charm cannot hide violence forever. The mask that once convinced strangers now looked strained, stretched thin over the emptiness it concealed. He was not winning, he was drowning, yet he refused to sink quietly. When the verdict approached, he rehearsed his reaction. He wanted to appear dignified, intelligent, unbroken. He practiced facial expressions like a man choosing costumes, weighing which illusion would survive in memory. Outrage, no, to common. Tears, never, to human. Cold brilliance misunderstood by society. Yes, the myth must live even as the body falls. And when the words declared him guilty, final and absolute, he lifted his chin, forced a smirk as if mocking fate. But his eyes betrayed him, trembling with the terror of a man whose audience was leaving, whose performance was ending, whose mask was cracking in the harsh light of truth. In that courtroom, he did not fight for justice, he fought for identity. He tried to convince the world he was extraordinary, but extraordinary men do not fear silence. Extraordinary men do not crumble when attention fades. He wanted the legend of a brilliant mind misunderstood. What remained was a predator exposed, a manipulator stripped of illusion, a hollow man whose arrogance could not save him. When the gavel struck, it did not merely seal his fate. It killed the character he tried to become, leaving behind only what he always truly was, not a genius, not a mystery, but a performer whose audience finally saw through the act. They did not love a man, they loved a myth. They loved a face shaped by charm and a name whispered in the darkest corners of America. As the nation trembled at his crimes, a strange and unsettling phenomenon emerged. Letters arrived at the prison filled with perfume and trembling handwriting. Women waited outside courthouses just to see him step into the room. Some cried for him, some argued for his innocence. Some claimed destiny tied their hearts together. They looked at a killer and saw a misunderstood soul, a man who needed them, a dark prince trapped in a cruel world. To them, danger was not frightening, it was intoxicating. His crimes did not repel them, they ignited fascination. The brutality that horrified a nation became, in their minds, proof of passion, proof of power. They believed they could heal him, reform him, tame him. It was not empathy. It was fantasy. They fell in love not with reality, but with an illusion born from fear, curiosity, and the seductive pull of forbidden desire. In their daydreams, they were the exception, the one who could rescue the beast, the one who could stand beside him and be chosen by darkness. He understood their hunger. He fed it. From his cell, he crafted charm like a weapon, shaping words to lure admirers into orbit around his ego. He smiled at them in court, eyes soft, voice gentle, offering the warmth he never felt. Each gaze became a hook, each compliment a chain. He spoke to them as if they mattered deeply, though in truth they were only reflections of his own need for control. They believed they were special. He believed they were tools. Every fen letter, every tear shed for him, every woman who defended him in public only strengthened the narrative he built, the narrative of a man too captivating to be condemned. They arrived in dresses, fixing their hair before entering the courtroom, hoping he might glance their way. They followed his trial not for justice, but for romance scripted in their imagination. Some brought gifts, some proudly declared their love to reporters. Some abandoned families and reputations to defend a man they never truly knew. For them, this was not horror, it was devotion. They believed cruelty could coexist with tenderness, that behind the monstrous acts lived a man capable of beauty and loyalty. They clung to that belief with desperate innocence, blinded by fascination that felt like destiny. In truth, their attraction had roots in something deeper and darker. Some sought power through association with terror. To love a feared man was to borrow his aura, to feel untouchable, extraordinary. Others were drawn by vulnerability disguised as strength. They thought they saw a wounded boy lost in a harsh world, a misunderstood genius punished by ignorance. They projected empathy onto emptiness and mistook manipulation for emotion. And some, quietly, felt a thrill knowing he chose victims who resembled them, as if danger validated their desirability, turning fear into allure. He encouraged them with subtle gestures, soft smiles, calculated kindness. In letters, he spoke in poetic fragments, promising connection without commitment, affection without honesty. He said enough to keep them close, but never enough to give them power. He asked for sympathy, money, loyalty. They sent what they could. He praised them when useful, ignored them when bored, replaced them without guilt. In their minds, they loved a tragic figure. In his mind, they were mirrors reflecting his illusion of importance. Their devotion was not a gift, it was fuel. Some women fought fiercely for him, arguing his innocence, attacking his critics, building him into a martyr in their fantasies. Others offered themselves with trembling excitement, believing intimacy with darkness would make them unique. They misunderstood one truth: a man without empathy cannot love. He did not see them as partners. He saw them as trophies, as validation, as proof that even caged and condemned, he could still conquer minds and hearts. The letters that overwhelmed the prison were not signs of romance. They were monuments to manipulation. One woman stood above the rest, loyal beyond reason. She sat in the courtroom each day, eyes glued to him as though he were a fallen angel. She married him in that same courtroom, believing love could bloom in chains and violence. To the world, it was madness. To her, it was devotion. She believed she saw goodness where others saw evil. She believed she was chosen, not used. She believed love could erase blood, but devotion to a monster does not purify him. It corrupts the one who kneels. Thousands watched with disbelief, questioning why women would embrace a killer. But the answer lived in the human psyche, in the dark corners where fear and desire intertwine. Some longed for danger because ordinary life felt small. Some craved a story bigger than themselves, even if it was soaked in horror. Some mistook infamy for greatness, cruelty for strength, attention for love. And some simply believed the lies he whispered because believing felt safer than accepting the truth about monsters who wear charming faces. They did not love him. They loved what he pretended to be, and he did not love them. He loved only the mirror they provided, the reflection of power and fascination he needed like breath. In the end, they were not his lovers, they were his audience. And just like the courtroom, just like the cameras, just like the newspaper headlines, they served one purpose: to feed the ego of a man who lived not for connection but for control, a man who convinced the world to watch him even when his soul deserved silence. Prison walls are built to break men, steel bars are meant to suffocate hope, to remind every soul inside that freedom has been permanently exiled. Yet for him, confinement was not a sentence, it was a challenge. Where most saw impossibility, he saw an unfinished puzzle waiting for clever hands. He believed the world could not hold him because he was smarter than the system that caught him. He believed that cages were for ordinary criminals, not for men who saw themselves as exceptional. And in that belief, he began planning not survival, but escape. His first escape did not come from brute force or secret tunnels. It came from observation, patience, and arrogance sharpened into strategy. He studied routines, memorized guard patterns, learned blind corners and weak checkpoints. He smiled at officers as though accepting fate, and they mistook compliance for surrender. He made himself appear harmless, quiet, exhausted by trial. But behind the calm gaze, he measured every bolt, every sound, every second that passed between footsteps in the hallway. He was not adjusting to imprisonment. He was mapping it, tracing freedom in the cracks of discipline. Then came the moment. Thin body, starved intentionally. Bedsheets arranged to mimic a sleeping form. A window frame loosened over weeks by hidden hands. A jump that should have broken him but instead tasted like rebirth. For hours he crawled through darkness, branches tearing skin, soil smearing the face of a man who believed himself too brilliant for chains. In that night escape, he did not feel fear. He felt triumph, as though the world finally bowed to his superiority. Yet freedom granted under delusion does not bless, it corrupts. He fled into wilderness thinking fate favored him. Instead, he stepped deeper into madness. But survival requires more than arrogance. Hunger gnawed, cold bit into bones. The forest did not care for charm or intellect. Days passed like punishment disguised as liberty. His great victory soon felt like humiliation. He was not a mastermind ruling his destiny. He was a fugitive crawling through mud, a man devoured by ego and starving under the weight of reality. When authorities caught him again, exhausted and dirty, he forced a smile. He acted amused, like a man who simply enjoyed the thrill of chase. Yet under that smirk lived rage that the world refused to kneel to his idea of greatness. The second escape was bolder, refined through humiliation. His pride demanded spectacle this time. He studied the courthouse building like a student obsessed with architecture of freedom. He exercised relentlessly, thinning his body again, preparing muscles for a leap most would call impossible. He stole hacksaw blades, hid them where only patience could find them. When he loosened ceiling panels, he imagined applause echoing through time. He was not building a path out, he was sculpting a monument to his belief in his superiority. Then it happened, a gap in supervision, a careless guard. A leap from a bookshelf into the ceiling like a phantom disappearing into air. He crawled above fluorescent lights and courtroom ceilings, slipping into darkness where law could not see him. When he dropped into the judge's office, exchanging imprisonment for stolen breath, he felt immortal. He walked out disguised by ordinary clothes, swallowed by crowds who never imagined the polite man beside them was a predator reborn. He ran with the confidence of someone convinced destiny would not permit failure. This time freedom tasted sweeter. He shaved, he changed names. He flirted with strangers, sat in church pews, and watched the world move unaware that death walked among them again. He smiled in public like a man reborn, but he was not free. He was unhinged. Freedom fed the hunger inside him. It whispered temptations, teased impulses, sharpened the predatory instinct that prison had only paused, not killed, and soon the mask slipped. The restraint shattered, his hands returned to violence as if escape were not a path to life but a descent into deeper darkness. He believed escape made him legend. Instead, it unmasked him. The murders that followed were not intelligent or calculated. They were frantic, sloppy, the acts of a desperate man drowning in his own ego. He did not rise toward greatness. He collapsed into chaos. Every step he took as a fugitive etched another line of condemnation into history. When law caught him again, this time blood-stained and breathless, he did not wear triumph. He wore defeat dressed in arrogance. His once smooth demeanor cracked into something feral, a man who learned the world could catch him after all. Prisons build walls for flesh, but his true prison was his mind, a cage of narcissism that could not accept its own limits. Escape did not prove brilliance, it proved obsession, it proved emptiness. It proved that a man who worships control eventually destroys himself chasing illusions. When steel doors slammed shut again, heavier, colder, final, he pretended calm. But inside, a truth took shape he could not silence. Freedom had never belonged to him. It never would. And the world did not fear him anymore. It pitied him. In the end, his escapes did not immortalize him as a genius of cunning. They exposed him as a creature of impulse and ego, a man who believed he could outrun truth but instead ran straight into his fate. He escaped bars of steel, but not the gravity of who he truly was. A predator without discipline, a performer without audience, a coward who mistook running for power. And when the final cell closed, it did not trap a legend. It trapped a man whose fantasy of control collapsed under the weight of reality, leaving silence where arrogance once roared. He arrived in Florida like a shadow with a heartbeat, drifting through streets lined with palm trees and neon lights, carrying the illusion of a second life he believed fate owed him. He walked among crowds as if reborn, blending into sunlight with a smile that did not belong to a hunted man. He rented rooms under false names, sat calmly in libraries, spoke politely to strangers who had no idea what darkness walked beside them. He believed distance erased guilt. He believed sunshine could bleach blood from memory. Florida was not refuge, it was the stage of his final collapse. He pretended to be normal again. He tried jobs, moved from place to place, rehearsed charm in front of bathroom mirrors like a man trying to resurrect a dying myth. But the world had changed him. He was no longer hiding brilliance behind calm eyes. He was cornered hunger disguised in clean clothes. His voice carried tension, his hands carried tremor. Freedom did not soothe him. It agitated him, stirred the violence he tried to pretend he could outrun. He saw young women laughing in the streets at night and felt the old storm rise within him, a storm that never died, only slept. He sunk deeper into anonymity, watching houses and dorms with a stalking patience sharpened by desperation. He wandered campuses at night, seeing opportunity where others saw innocence. He could not help himself because control was not habit to him, it was oxygen. Silence thinned around him. The mask began peeling. His eyes sharpened with hunger that could not hide. His fantasies, once distant escape, returned as commands. He needed power the way drowning men need air. And in the humid Florida night, he allowed darkness to reclaim him, like gravity pulling him into a pit he dug himself. Chi Omega, a quiet sorority house where laughter and safety lived moments before he arrived. He slipped in not like a human being but like a nightmare wearing a human face. The door gave way silently. Hallways swallowed his footsteps. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew no one expected him there, the confidence of a predator certain of his strength. In the stillness of early morning, innocence slept peacefully, unaware that horror had entered the room. He did not hesitate. He did not doubt. Violence did not return slowly. It exploded. The attack was brutal, fast, merciless. He became the creature he truly was, leaving behind pretended intellect and stepping into raw cruelty. Rooms became crime scenes. Dreams turned to terror. The quiet house filled with violence no young life should ever face. His rage did not come from survival instinct. It came from entitlement and ego shattered by failure, from the hatred of a man who could not accept his own insignificance. He inflicted pain not to escape consequences, but to feel powerful again, to remind himself he existed, to feed the hunger that prison silence had only starved deeper. Yet even in violence, arrogance betrayed him. He left fingerprints, he left teeth marks. He left chaos so loud it echoed beyond the walls, waking a world that would never again underestimate the monster beneath the charming mask. His escape had transformed from legend to madness. The man who once manipulated courts now stumbled, sloppy and reckless. He fled the scene breathless, not like a genius moving through shadows, but like a cornered animal running from a fate it created. He stole cars, changed disguises, tried to outrun sirens in his mind. But Florida was not a fresh beginning, it was his final descent. Soon, police spotted him in a stolen car, clothes wrinkled, face drawn tight with exhaustion and rage. When stopped, he tried charm again, the same smile that fooled strangers before. But charm could not disguise desperation. The officer saw panic in his eyes, the trembling denial of a fallen ego. He fought, he fled, he was forced down, arrested once more not as a mythic figure but as a sweating, furious man who no longer controlled even a moment of his fate. In that second capture, the illusion finally shattered. The world had caught him again, and this time it would not let go. When news broke, America was stunned not because he had resurfaced, but because the nightmare had grown bolder in freedom. He sat in prison again, staring at walls that no longer looked like obstacles, but like mirrors. He was not the brilliant mastermind he claimed. He was a predator cornered by his own arrogance. Cameras would soon return, this time not to watch performance, but to witness unraveling. His trial would not be a stage for genius, but for exposure. His calm exterior began cracking, revealing a man terrified of disappearing into the void where no audience watches and no name echoes. Florida did not destroy him. He destroyed himself in Florida. In sunlit streets meant for joy, he brought horror. In a state known for warmth, he carried cold hatred. Every moment of his escape led here, to a final chapter where illusion collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. He believed he was invincible. He believed fate bent to him. But fate does not negotiate with ego. It waits. And when it strikes, it does not miss. In the end, Florida was not freedom, it was judgment. It was the stage where the mask finally dissolved and the world saw not a brilliant escape artist, not a misunderstood genius, but a violent coward whose final breath of liberty led only to deeper darkness and a cell that would never again open. The chase was over, the myth was broken, the descent was complete. He never confessed easily. Confession was surrender, and surrender was death to a man powered by ego. But interviews, they were different. Interviews offered oxygen. They offered attention, relevance, a stage when the world outside prison walls kept moving without him. Locked away, stripped of freedom, he still believed he could control perception, manipulate minds, twist truth until it bent like metal under heat. When microphones appeared, his voice returned to life. When cameras focused, he straightened his posture, smoothed his hair, and prepared to perform once more. He did not speak as a man haunted by guilt. He spoke like a professor lecturing students, choosing every word with surgical precision. Soft tone, calm pauses, gentle expressions, he crafted an illusion of reflection, wisdom, even emotional depth. But beneath that polished surface, nothing changed. His eyes still held calculation, not remorse. His smile still curved from ego, not grief. He was not seeking forgiveness, he was seeking control. He wanted to direct the narrative, not clarify truth. Interviews became his final playground for dominance, psychological warfare disguised as dialogue. He answered questions in spirals, not straight lines. When asked about crimes, he talked about society, psychology, media, anything that shifted spotlight from guilt to intellect. He spoke in long, winding sentences designed to sound insightful, masking emptiness beneath intellectual tone. Sometimes he hinted at regret, but only enough to appear human. He never gave full truth, only fragments. He dangled information like bait, offering just enough detail to stay valuable, to remain relevant, to keep the world curious. Every half-confession was a strategy, not honesty. He referenced the killer like speaking about another person, separating himself from his own acts through language. It was distance by vocabulary, guilt diluted through grammar. He wanted to treat his crimes as academic case studies, not atrocities. When pressed for specifics, he shifted blame to forces beyond himself: childhood, addiction, society, darkness, temptation. He framed violence as compulsion, tragedy, misunderstanding. He turned murder into narrative and himself into narrator, trying to control horror by wrapping it in eloquent speech. Journalists noticed the pattern: a man who spoke endlessly without saying anything direct. But some were seduced by his intelligence, entertained by the game, fascinated by the paradox of charm beside hatred. Others grew frustrated as he dodged and danced, turning interviews into puzzles. He was never afraid of questions. He was afraid of giving control. Truth, to him, was currency. He spent it in tiny amounts, never freely. He believed information made him powerful, even behind bars. In moments when the mask slipped, when silence stretched too long or a question pierced too deeply, his eyes hardened, voice sharpened, jaw tightened. Vulnerability flickered only as anger, never sorrow. And when he felt the audience drifting, he shifted tactics, becoming philosophical, dramatic, even spiritual. He spoke of redemption, humanity, evil as a force larger than him. It was theater for minds, a final stage where he attempted to sculpt legacy with words instead of actions. As execution neared, pressure grew. Investigators wanted closure. Families deserved truth. But still he rationed confession like water in a desert. He described murder only when forced, revealing in third person as if witnessing a stranger's actions. He savored the power of withholding. He watched desperation in the eyes of those who needed answers and felt superior. To him, control was not freedom of body but influence of mind. And interviews gave him that, yet over time, cracks widened. His voice shook in late interviews, confidence thinned. The world did not worship him, it studied him. Scholars analyzed him like disease under glass. Interviewers stopped chasing mystery and began exposing manipulation. Public interest shifted from fascination to disgust. He realized too late that intellect could not outrun consequence, that charm could not rewrite truth, that attention cannot save a dying myth. When finally he offered clearer confessions, details long withheld, it was not redemption. It was desperation, a bargaining attempt with fate, a final play to delay execution. He hoped usefulness could buy time, but time had already run dry. Truth spilled only when he feared the silence of death, not from conscience. His voice, once confident and alluring, trembled as the world prepared to turn away forever. In those final interviews, the mask broke. Not in dramatic collapse, but in quiet decay. The man who once manipulated millions sat behind glass, voice weak, eyes tired, ego cracked by inevitability. He tried to reclaim control through words, but interviews no longer served him. They revealed him. Beneath charm lived emptiness. Beneath intelligence lived cruelty. Beneath the mask lived a predator stripped of power. The interview games ended not when he confessed, but when the world stopped listening. His voice lost its spell, his game lost its audience. And in that silence, he met the truth he feared most. Without manipulation, he was nothing. No myth, no genius, only a man facing judgment without a stage left to stand on. Death row is not loud. It does not rage or scream. It waits. It breathes in quiet, heavy rhythm, pressing on the mind like unseen weight. Days do not pass, they crawl. Time stretches, then suffocates. In that stillness, every thought grows sharper, every fear louder, and for the first time in his life, he could not run. He could not charm. He could not disappear into fantasy or performance. The walls did not bend to ego, and the future no longer offered escape. He sat alone, a man who once believed himself invincible, now forced to look directly at the end he always thought belonged only to others. At first, he pretended strength. He forced calm smiles for guards, offered polite nods, played the role of the misunderstood prisoner still confident in his brilliance. He repeated to himself that appeals would work, that the world might reconsider, that someone somewhere still admired him enough to save him. But behind closed doors, the truth crept in. Nights stretched cold and silent. His thoughts no longer obeyed him. They circled like vultures, whispering images of the execution chamber, the strapped arms, the chemical burning through veins. His arrogance could silence others, but it could not silence mortality. His reflection in the small cell mirror became unfamiliar. The charming young man who once toyed with crowds was gone. His eyes, once calculating and hungry for control, dimmed into something colder, not remorse, but fear disguised as fatigue. His voice grew quieter, his movements slower. He read books not for knowledge, but to escape thought, and yet thought seeped through every page. He pressed his fingers against his neck, feeling life pulsing, wondering how it would feel when that pulse slowed, when it stopped. Death, once distant, now stood inches away, patient and unbothered by ego. Visitors came, priests, psychologists, reporters. He tried to wear his old mask with them, speaking calmly, offering philosophical reflections, pretending he had found deeper meaning. But even those who once fell under his spell now saw the tremor beneath his tone, the cracks in the performance. He would pause mid-sentence, stare at the floor too long, breathe too deeply before answering. His control was slipping, not in sudden collapse, but in slow unraveling. For a man who built identity on dominance, powerlessness tasted like poison. Appeals failed. Legal maneuvers collapsed. Doors closed one by one, not slammed, but sealed quietly, like the world finally turning its back. He paced his cell with restless steps, practicing arguments not for court but for himself, searching for justification, for some narrative in which he remained grand instead of condemned. But inside him, truth grew heavy. There was no stage left, no audience that mattered. The only listener now was death, and death did not negotiate. Sometimes, at night, he pressed his palms to his face and shook his head slowly, as if trying to force thoughts away. In other moments, he sat perfectly still, staring forward with hollow eyes, mind drifting through fragments of memory he could not control, faces, screams, doors slamming, lights flashing, the cold taste of handcuffs, the heat of anger. Not guilt, memory. Guilt requires empathy. He did not feel sorrow for victims, he felt fear for himself. His final appeals became desperate, stripped of confidence. He begged lawyers, pressed trembling signatures on forms, spoke faster, voice cracking at corners he tried to hold strong. And yet, even then, he could not fully abandon manipulation. Part of him believed pity could save him, part of him believed humanity could resurrect his myth. But death row does not reward performance. It exposes it. Every lie echoed back empty. Every attempt to regain power dissolved in silence. Days before execution, the mask broke completely. His voice, once smooth and charming, shook as he spoke. His hands clenched when he thought no one was watching. He avoided mirrors. He avoided silence. He avoided stillness. Reality had cornered him more thoroughly than any prison guard ever could. The game was over, and he knew it. He tried prayer not from faith, but from fear. Tried remorse not from conscience, but from panic. He whispered to the walls like a man hoping sound alone might keep him from disappearing. Those who saw him in those final days described a man hollowed out by inevitability. A creature who once fed on control now starved for even the smallest illusion of power. His eyes, once sharp with predatory hunger, now flickered with desperation, the look of someone staring into a horizon that no longer held a future. He did not die bold. He did not face fate with poetic calm. His spirit shrank before death touched him. He was not a legend in those moments. He was a frightened man in a small room, waiting for footsteps that would never turn away again. Execution did not frighten him because of pain. It frightened him because it erased audience, because it ended the possibility of myth, because it forced him to exist without manipulation, without stage, without mask. For the first time, he confronted a force he could not charm, outthink, or escape: finality. And as the last hours approached, nothing remained of the grand persona he built: no brilliance, no charisma, no power. Only breath counting down, and a silence too heavy to break. Death was coming. And he, who once believed himself above consequence, could no longer hide from the truth. Monsters do not escape forever. Even the clever ones eventually face the end. And when illusion dies, only the reality of who they are remains. Morning did not arrive gently. It did not rise with hope or promise. It came heavy, thick, and final, pressed against the prison like a storm ready to swallow every voice inside. The hallway outside his cell did not echo with footsteps of routine. It breathed with the weight of inevitability. Today was not another day in confinement. Today was the end. And everyone knew it: guards, witnesses, reporters gathering outside, crowds waiting with signs and shouts, as if watching the final act of a spectacle they never asked to star in but could not turn away from. Death had an appointment. There would be no delay. He woke not from sleep, but from hours of restless, half-conscious panic. Eyes wide in the darkness, breath shallow, hands trembling without control. For a man who once manipulated worlds, time now controlled him. He sat upright slowly, as if movement itself carried weight. No mirrors were allowed in the final hours, yet he did not need one. He felt his face older, thinner, drained of performance. There was no mask left to wear. He could not charm death. He could not outthink the end. He could only wait for the knock. The silence of dawn pressed around him like a shroud. Guards arrived with solemn footsteps. No smiles, no anger, only duty heavy in their posture. He tried to stand tall, to pretend control, but his body betrayed him, shoulders hunched, knees softened. His voice, when he spoke, cracked around dry air, a whisper swallowed before it formed fully. "Is it time?" he asked, as if hoping the answer might shift reality. But the guard did not need to respond. The keys turning in the lock answered for him. He stepped forward, slow and fragile, a man not facing glory or legend, just consequence. Outside, crowds waited like witnesses to history, holding signs, shouting, chanting, some in rage, some in celebration, some simply watching to see darkness finally meet its end. Fire burned in the cold morning air. People lit candles, some held torches, some held pictures of the victims whose faces deserved to live longer than his name ever would. A strange festival atmosphere churned outside prison gates. The world had gathered not to mourn him, but to mark the moment justice arrived. Those who suffered did not stand alone today. Voices rose for them, not for the man inside. In the death chamber, the air was colder, sterile, too clean for the weight it held. Fluorescent lights hung overhead, emotionless. The gurney waited like a silent witness, straps open and ready. Technicians prepared quietly, hands practiced, movements precise. They did not look at him as a monster or a genius or an icon. They looked at him as procedure, a task, a man who would soon be a body. For someone who lived craving attention, indifference was the sharpest cut. No spotlight, no applause, no performance left. Just straps and silence. He asked for final words, but not immediately. He lingered in hesitation, breathing unevenly, searching for a sentence that might preserve dignity, carve a legacy, rewrite judgment. But genius had abandoned him, or perhaps it never existed at all. What emerged was not wisdom, it was emptiness struggling for meaning. He spoke of innocence before, but not now. Pride cracked, fear leaked through every breath. He mentioned love, morality, faith, concepts he never lived but clung to now like a drowning man grips water. His voice trembled where once it commanded. His hands twitched where once they controlled. Reporters leaned forward to catch each syllable, but the world heard not a mastermind closing his story, just a frightened man trying to sound bigger than the truth. There was no myth left to preserve, no mask left to polish. His heart beat loud in his ears, drowning thought. The needle shone under white lights, the clock ticked louder than any crowd. He swallowed hard, breath fast, shallow. The predator felt hunted at last, not by police or law, but by the one force he had never been able to outrun, consequence. When the injection began, witnesses leaned forward, expecting rage, defiance, last-second confession, explosion of ego. But there was none. His face slackened, not in peace, but in surrender. Eyes darted, blinked, widened, recognition that this was real, irreversible, final. Muscles loosened as chemicals traveled through veins that once carried arrogance. Lips parted slightly, as if expecting breath to return by will alone. But control was gone. He was no longer the man who fooled crowds and seduced danger. He was just a fading heartbeat in a quiet room. Outside, cheers erupted, not from cruelty, but closure. Survivors wiped tears. Families held one another, not in celebration of death, but in relief that a chapter of torment had finally closed. Flames flickered against morning sky as people prayed, cried, remembered victims whose voices deserved to echo louder than his forever. His name was not shouted in praise, but in warning. What charisma without conscience becomes, what intelligence without empathy destroys, what evil hides behind polite smiles and clever words. Inside, the room stilled, breath slowed, eyes fixed. And then, nothing, no final revelation, no genius delivered to the world. No dramatic end worthy of the legend he imagined himself to be, just silence, just stillness. A man who believed he could defy fate succumbed as all mortals do, without glory, without power, without control. Execution did not make him important, it made him small, human, ordinary in death as he always was beneath illusion. And as the body was carried away, the world did not bow, it exhaled. Justice did not erase pain, but it marked the end of his shadow. Today belonged not to him, but to those he hurt. His story ended not in brilliance or mystery, but in a quiet room where truth finally stood untouched by manipulation. The execution did not create closure, it confirmed reality. Masks fall, evil dies. Memory belongs to the victims, not the man who thought fear made him powerful. And the world moved forward without him, as it always would. A predator is not born with blood on his hands. He is born with emptiness where conscience should live, a quiet void that grows until hunger replaces feeling and domination replaces connection. He learns early that emotion can be studied like language, practiced like performance, used like weapon. He does not feel guilt, he studies guilt in others. He does not feel empathy, he imitates warmth to lower defenses. His mind is not chaotic, it is calculated, cold, deliberate. Every smile is chosen, every silence measured. He moves through life not searching for companionship but searching for control. Inside him there is a fault line. On one side stands charm, intelligence, discipline, the polished mask built to seduce the world. On the other side lies a storm of rage, insecurity, and hunger for power he can never satisfy. He needs admiration because his soul is hollow. He needs dominance because his ego is fragile. He needs to be feared and desired because he fears being ordinary more than he fears punishment. That contrast creates tension, public charisma, and private darkness, a life lived balancing between illusion and instinct. He never connects, he consumes. Relationships are not bonds but tools. People are not companions but objects placed in categories: useful, irrelevant, or obstacles. Praise feeds him. Attention fuels him, but genuine emotional intimacy is poison to his illusion. He cannot share weakness, he transforms it into manipulation. He cannot accept vulnerability, he replaces it with arrogance. Love means nothing to him unless it grants power. To possess is not enough, he must conquer. To conquer is not enough, he must destroy. Violence becomes expression, not emotion. Control becomes religion, not instinct. His intelligence is not brilliance, it is cunning sharpened by obsession. He studies social cues like equations, learning which gestures inspire trust, which tones disarm suspicion, which expressions ignite sympathy. He adapts not because he grows, but because survival demands illusion. He knows the world fears monsters, so he becomes charming instead. He knows cruelty alarms, so he smiles. He learns empathy's gestures without feeling its presence. That imitation is his camouflage, his weapon, his shield. He performs humanity, but never belongs to it. Narcissism rules every breath. He sees himself not as flawed human, but superior creation. Others exist for validation or control, never partnership. When challenged, he does not reflect, he retaliates. Criticism is threat. Rejection is humiliation. Boundaries are insult. He does not ask, he takes. He does not apologize, he blames. He does not forgive, he punishes. The world is stage, the self is idol, everyone else is furniture arranged to support the performance of greatness he believes destiny promised him. Behind arrogance, insecurity festers. He fears insignificance, fears being unseen, fears a life where he does not dominate minds and shape perception. That terror fuels cruelty. Violence becomes declaration. I exist, I control, I matter. Each victim is not person, they are proof of power, trophies carved from suffering, reminders that the world can still kneel beneath his will. He returns to crime scenes not for memory, but for ownership. He revisits horrors not for thrill, but for confirmation that he bent reality and life to his will, even if only for moments. He rationalizes every act, he builds grand theories to justify darkness. Society failed him, psychology explains him, destiny cursed him. He speaks about evil like scholar, not participant. Distance protects self-image, responsibility is foreign language. Remorse is performance, tears, when they appear, do not fall for victims but for himself, for lost control, lost freedom, lost audience. The predator mourns not pain he caused, but power he lost. He does not regret actions, he regrets consequences. Fear does not leave him untouched, it hides beneath ego like shadow beneath flame. When cornered, when the illusion breaks, panic surfaces. He does not fear death for morality. He fears death because it erases his myth, silences his name, ends his stage. Mortality humiliates him. Insignificance terrifies him. When execution looms, his arrogance cracks, revealing core not of steel but dust. He trembles not because he sees wrong, but because he sees end. The predator who believed himself invincible discovers he is mortal, and mortality has no mask to hide behind. What creates him? A cocktail of nature twisted and nurture broken, absence of empathy, hunger for control, childhood fractures, ego unchecked, fantasy unchained. But many face hardship without becoming predators. The difference lies in choice fueled by pathology. He chooses deception over healing, domination over connection, violence over vulnerability. He embraces the void rather than filling it. He does not merely lack humanity, he rejects it. Understanding him does not forgive him, describing his nature does not soften it. To study a predator is not to pity one, it is to expose him. The psychology behind his cruelty reveals truth. Evil is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it smiles, speaks softly, wears clean clothes, and looks like anyone you might trust. The predator hides not in shadows but in plain sight, protected by charm, empowered by belief in his superiority, convinced the world exists to serve him. And in the end, when the mask falls, he is not powerful, he is not brilliant, he is not special. He is small, empty, fragile, a hollow creature who mistook manipulation for genius and fear for respect. His legacy is not insight into brilliance, it is warning of what soul without empathy becomes, what ambition without conscience creates, and how monstrous a human can appear when humanity is abandoned in pursuit of control. Their names did not echo across headlines the way his did. Their lives did not become books or documentaries or courtroom spectacles. They did not sit for interviews or play mind games or perform for cameras. They were daughters, sisters, friends, students, dreamers. They were human, full of beginnings, not endings. Yet history too often remembers the predator louder than the people he stole, but here, his shadow steps aside. Here they stand in their rightful light, not as footnotes in his story, but as souls whose futures should have stretched further than his darkness ever could. They walked campuses with books in hand, believing in tomorrow. They laughed with friends, chased ambitions, planned futures filled with love and accomplishment. Some dreamed of careers in medicine or education. Some practiced music, some trained for sports, some wrote poetry no one would ever get to read again. Their rooms held photographs, notebooks, clothes laid out for days they never reached. They were not defined by fear or by violence. They were defined by hope, and hope stolen is a wound history must not ignore. Families remember the sound of their voices, soft in the morning, bright in the afternoon, excited when sharing plans. They remember ordinary beauty, the smell of hair after rain, the tapping of shoes in hallways, the way sunlight touched their faces. They remember small joys, birthdays, inside jokes, late-night conversations, holidays spent laughing, quiet evenings with shared stories. That is what was taken, not just lives, but brightness, potential, the quiet warmth of being loved and loving back. Their mothers keep old photographs where smiles freeze time, their fathers carry silence like weight. Siblings grew older while memories of them stayed young, paused at ages they could never pass. Friends look back at empty chairs in classrooms and say their names softly, afraid the world might forget. Some graves hold flowers, some hearts hold grief that never softens. Trauma lives not only in crime scenes, it lives in every life touched by absence. And absence grows louder as years pass, not quieter. Each victim deserves to be seen as more than tragedy. They were not statistics, they were not symbols. They were individuals with unique voices and gentle hearts. One loved to play piano, fingers dancing across keys with passion. One volunteered at shelters, believing kindness built better worlds. One ran track and felt alive in motion. One wrote letters to friends with doodles filling the margins. One saved theater tickets, one collected seashells, one dreamed of traveling the world. They were more than what happened to them. Their stories had chapters waiting to be written. Some were shy, some bold, some introverted, some bright like summer. They were funny, compassionate, curious, stubborn, brilliant in ways big and small. They were learning who they were and shaping who they wanted to become. They had fears, ambitions, secrets, goals. They planned careers, marriages, adventures. They wanted to grow old, to see seasons change, to build families, to find peace, to experience ordinary moments that now feel miraculous because they never had the chance. Their pain should never be reduced to lesson. Their deaths should never be exploited for intrigue. True remembrance is not fascination with horror, it is respect for humanity. When speaking of them, the voice should soften, not swell. Memory should rise like candle light, not like spectacle. We honor them not by retelling violence, but by acknowledging everything beyond it, the fullness of who they were, not the brutality of how they were taken. Some say time heals grief, but time does not heal everything. Time teaches endurance, not erasure. Families carry love with one hand and loss with the other. Some learn to speak about them without tears. Others still break at the sound of their names. But every tear proves love, and every memory preserves dignity. To remember them is to resist the darkness that tried to erase them. When documentaries focus on killers, silence falls heavy. But silence must not fall on victims. Their names deserve candles, not shadows. Chapters, not footnotes. Let memory speak louder than cruelty. Let empathy stand where fear once stood. Let those lives, delicate and beautiful, remain in present tense, not gone, but carried forward in the hearts they shaped and the futures they should have seen. They were not born to suffer, they were born to live. We honor them by saying they lived. They dreamed, they mattered, they still matter. And though horror took their final breaths, it did not claim their meaning. Meaning belongs to those who are loved, and they are loved still, deeply, fiercely, forever. Darkness ended their days, it cannot touch their legacy. When their names are spoken, speak with quiet reverence. When their faces are remembered, remember them in motion, laughing, learning, loving, becoming. They were light, they remain light. And every time the world chooses to remember them instead of the monster who took them, that light grows stronger, pushing back against cruelty like dawn pushing night into silence. He did not leave behind a legacy of greatness, despite how desperately he wanted one. What remains of him is not admiration, but warning, a blueprint of how manipulation masquerades as charm, how cruelty hides behind eloquent words, and how a polished smile can cloak the darkest decay beneath. His life carved a lesson into the memory of society. Evil is not always loud, violent, or obvious. Sometimes it is polite, articulate, handsome, and clean-shaven. Sometimes it shakes your hand and looks you in the eye. Sometimes it convinces you it cannot possibly be the monster in the story, and that is precisely why it becomes so dangerous. Before him, many believed killers stood out. Strange, awkward, visibly broken, he shattered that lie. He proved that predators can blend into crowds, earn trust, build relationships, and mimic humanity perfectly enough to fool almost anyone. His manipulation forced investigators, psychologists, and ordinary people to confront the truth that monsters do not announce themselves. They study us, learn us, copy us. They do not grow claws, they grow masks, and when those masks crack, the world sees how convincing deception can be, how deeply charm can poison judgment, and how much harm a single individual can inflict when belief replaces scrutiny. His influence changed investigation methods, prioritizing behavioral profiling and psychological analysis. Law enforcement began studying the subtle cues, the patterns of manipulation, the charm-turned predation. Universities created case studies exploring his narcissism, his lack of empathy, his ability to perform emotion without feeling it. Scholars dissected his interviews, his courtroom theatrics, his calculated lies, not to admire him, but to understand how someone so hollow could appear so convincing. His name became shorthand for the seductive face of evil, a man who fooled many not because he was brilliant, but because people did not want to believe someone so polished could be so monstrous. True crime culture, too, absorbed his story. Movies, books, documentaries, endless discussions, all circling a man who wanted to be unforgettable. But the more these stories spread, the clearer the message became. Fascination with killers must never become admiration. He craved legacy, notoriety, myth. Instead, he received exposure, clinical analysis, and history's cold gaze stripped of glamour. Where he once sought to be idolized, he became dissected. A specimen, not a legend. The attention he pursued became a cage of truth around his memory, forcing the world to see not intelligence but pathology, not charisma but emptiness. Yet perhaps the most important legacy he left lies not in psychology or policing, but in empathy. His crimes forced society to remember victims, to speak their names louder than his. His manipulation reminded the world that attention must not glorify predators, that stories must protect the dignity of the innocent, not fuel the ego of the guilty. In discussing him, we confront a deeper responsibility: to guard our trust wisely, to question polished surfaces, to recognize that evil can wear human shape and still be inhuman within. He believed manipulation was power. But time proved otherwise. Manipulation is not strength. It is weakness hiding behind performance. Charm is not greatness, it is camouflage when used to deceive. He stood for nothing noble, only hunger, ego, and void where humanity should have been. History does not celebrate him, it exposes him. It holds him up not as symbol of brilliance, but as warning, a testament to how dangerous unchecked confidence, unearned trust, and unexamined charisma can become. And in the end, his memory carries no triumph, it carries caution. It tells us to look beyond smiles, to question the charming stranger, to listen when instinct whispers that something feels wrong. His story teaches that evil is not mythical, it is human-shaped, articulate, confident, and sometimes admired before it is unmasked. His legacy is not fascination, it is vigilance. Not admiration, awareness, a reminder carved into history through blood and deception that humanity must never confuse charisma for character, confidence for conscience, or performance for truth. Evil rarely arrives with a roar. Sometimes it whispers ... sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it speaks softly about dreams and ambition, hiding hunger behind polished eyes. This was not a story about greatness lost, it was a story about illusion unmasked. Behind the charm lived emptiness, behind confidence lived fear. Behind the mask lived a man who believed that control was the same as meaning and manipulation the same as power. But power built on deception collapses, masks crack. Voices fall silent, and when ego burns out, what remains is truth, cold, simple, undeniable. He wanted to be remembered as extraordinary. He wanted to be feared, studied, admired, discussed like a myth. Yet in the end, he stood not as legend, but as caution, not as genius, but as warning. Not as mystery, but as proof that darkness sometimes dresses itself in confidence and calls it brilliance. Real legacy belongs not to the predator, but to those who survived his shadow. To those who fought to be heard, remembered, honored. This story belongs to them. Their lives carry the meaning he never had. Their names carry the dignity he never earned. Their memory outlives his performance, and so we close this chapter. Not in fear, but in clarity, not in fascination with his face, but in recognition of his emptiness. Not by feeding his myth, but by ending it. The light moves forward, the mask is gone, the lesson remains. Silence follows him now. History watches over the rest.